Power Project family, we talked to you about mouth tape before, and it's time to get better quality sleep, stop snoring, and wake up better rested. Andrew, how can they get their hands on some hostage tape?
You guys got to head over to hostagetape.com/powerproject. You'll receive free shipping plus a free, incredible, awesome bedside tin. Again, hostagetape.com/powerproject. Links to them down in the description as well as podcast show notes. Oh,
Whoa,
God.
yes, Daddy.
Whoa.
Look at this. Magic.
I thought something was wrong with the audio, but you just have mouth tape on.
It's called being a ventriloquist.
There you go.
Power Project family, we talk about meat all the time on the podcast because protein is essential for your health. That's why I partner with Piedmontese. And if you head to their website, they have so much different types of beef. They have beef sticks, beef jerky, tons of different cuts of meat. You should go check them out. Andrew, how can they learn more?
You guys got to head over to Piedmontese.com. That's Piedmontese.com. And at checkout, enter promo code POWER to save 25% off your entire order. And if your order is over $150 or more, you get free 2-day shipping. Links to them down in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
How long do you guys typically record for?
Sometimes 2-3 hours.
Wow.
Sometimes just don't stop.
Just don't stop.
I think Bill Maeda might have been a 3.5-hour pod.
Yeah. It was Matt Wenning.
Oh,
and my silly dad joke is that podcast is still currently being recorded, like as we're talking here now.
Damn.
Yeah, that's how long that one was.
Damn.
It's still going.
Yeah.
Well, the reason why we brought you in, Max, we got a really important question. These little circular spinner spring things that go into shaker cups, there's a lot of controversy over these things. Do they do anything? Do you guys think they do anything? Like, what's your take on this, Max? We got to bring in an expert for us.
Is this a real serious question?
Yeah,
Yes.
look at this thing.
Yeah.
Do you get worried if you don't see this dropped in when someone's making a shake? Are you concerned?
Sometimes actually when I blend up collagen, the collagen actually gets like caught in here, and I have to like wedge my finger into it and push it out. It's kind of gross.
Right.
So I don't know. I put ice cubes in my blender bottle, and I let the ice cubes be the
that's the
agitator.
technique. This is first time you had coffee, protein, heavy cream all mixed together, right?
I feel jacked up. No, it's good. It's good. It's also probably the first time. Because I generally, I don't have a strong opinion against them necessarily, but I tend not to do like a lot of sucralose and like artificial sweeteners. So I probably in like more than a decade haven't had sucralose. So I'm probably getting a sucralose high.
I love it
as well. Yeah. Yeah.
There is a little bit in that product. In my other product, in the steak shake, there's no sucralose. So we'll send you some of that and see what you think of that one.
It's so good though. I'm down.
That's all that matters.
And I'm fasted. And I had cold brew earlier, so I'm getting like the infusion of the caffeine. Plus, you brought me the heavy cream. Plus, you got the 1,000 milligrams of sodium that I'm getting. Yeah,
we gave you a full court press. My brother's pushing kratom on you when he walks.
Yeah.
Did you know about the kratom that he mixed into that?
Yeah, it's all mixed in. Yeah, blended, mixed in.
Can I just move in? Like seriously, I love hanging out with you guys. This is awesome.
Yeah, so far so good.
So wait, so you purposefully avoid sucralose up until this point?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to. It's not for a strong belief that it's not good for you or anything like that. So I just don't want to make claims about it or anything like that. I tend to have like a bias just in terms of the things that I buy and bring into my house, like for like the quote unquote natural. And I know that there's like the appeal to nature fallacy. Not everything that's natural is good for you. But it's just like, it's a values thing. Like this is one of the issues that I have with the people in the wellness world that tend to suggest that all of our decisions be based on data. I think that that's like, not every decision that you make on a day-to-day basis is data-driven, right? Like you make decisions based on like values. And I think you have to plant a flag, right? So as not to have choice paralysis with every decision that you make on a day-to-day basis, right? And so for me, it's a lot easier for me to like, have this kind of like, rule for myself generally.
Yeah. Sometimes it just comes down to stuff that you like too.
100%.
Like maybe this isn't the best thing for me, but I really like this. I enjoy this.
Yeah. So I don't, I make no like claims about it or anything like that, but yeah, just in general. And there's also like a lot of, there's great brands on both sides. So that's just generally my.
How did you get into just like really studying and taking a deep dive into nutrition in general?
Great starting place. So I started college on a pre-med track, and that was because I had always been interested in health and nutrition and fitness. I was super passionate about those things. I wasn't an athlete. I became interested in bodybuilding when I was in high school, and I never aspired to be a bodybuilder. But I just became really enamored with like the world of supplementation and
those are fun times when you're just trying to be kind of jacked.
Yeah.
You're trying to figure it out and do your 3 sets of 10 and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Take your creatine.
100%. And I was like a shy, introverted computer nerd growing up in school. And I wasn't, I didn't identify with the athletes in my high school. And so when I saw like, I think it was like in Manhattan where I went to school, I stumbled into some mom and pop supplement store, and the guy behind the counter was actually like really generous with his knowledge. And he loaded me up with all these like muscle rags, which, in retrospect, we know are all like marketing vehicles, right? But
Muscle rags?
Yeah.
Wait, what are muscle rags?
Is that an actual company or something?
No, like like magazines and like these
mags.
Yeah.
Muscle mags. Oh, I thought
said
rags.
Yeah.
I did. No, 'cause I don't. In my head, I feel like that. Are they not ever referred to as that, or
Maybe
is that,
in
did I
New
just
York.
make that up?
I don't know.
I don't know.
New York? Yeah.
Maybe I just made it up on the fly. Maybe it's the most chuggy thing. I don't know. It's another
Or
word.
You just got to do the SoCal thing. Like, you guys don't have that in NorCal. It's okay. Like, that's a SoCal thing. My bad.
But like as an on ramp into this world, I was very grateful at the time, and they were super exciting. And I saw like the potions on the walls as being like portals, really, essentially, to help me transcend myself at the time. And I became really interested in working out, and I was seeing great like gains in the gym, and I started to feel more confident in my body. And I went into college aspiring to do something in the sciences, but halfway through college, I realized that I was also creative. I was a storyteller, and that I always looking back on my academic career, I was never really that good, because I would do good I would excel in the classes that I was interested in, so I would get like A's in the sciences that I had taken, but I would get D's in the classes that everybody would take to get the A's in. But I just wasn't interested in them. So I wouldn't show up, and I wouldn't study for tests and things like that. So my academic, my GPA was never that great. So I just knew that like med school wasn't the route for me. And so I ended up pivoting to a double major in film and psychology. And that led to me getting a job as a journalist out of college. I worked for a TV network in the US that I did for 6 years. I did that, and the topics that I covered there really ran the gamut, but I would always try to bring it back to health whenever I had the opportunity to do that. 6 years into that role, my experience there kind of like plateaued. I learned everything that there was to learn, and I left. And in my personal life, that was when my mom got sick. My mom, who was the person I'd been the closest to in life. I'm the oldest child in a very small family. I've got 2 younger brothers, and I was always incredibly close to my mom. And in about the year 2011, 2012, she started to show the earliest symptoms of what would ultimately be diagnosed as a form of dementia, like a rare neurodegenerative condition called Lewy body dementia. And I had no prior family history of any kind of neurodegenerative condition. So, the word Alzheimer's disease wasn't, or the condition wasn't even in my lexicon.
Is your mom fairly healthy?
She was not overweight. She was a thin and health conscious woman her whole life. But
she's still alive?
No, she passed away 3 years ago. Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that.
She passed away actually due to pancreatic cancer. So she had a very tragic, the last decade of her life, 8 years of her life were really hard. And, she was young when she first started to show these symptoms. And so I couldn't chalk up what I was seeing to old age. And it threw me, it was like a curveball, right? Like to me and my family. And because I was in between jobs, I had the privilege of being able to start accompanying her to doctor's appointments. I would fly home to New York City, which is, because I had been living in LA at the time, and I relished getting to spend more and more time with my mom. And so I would go with her to these doctor's appointments in New York City, which, as I mentioned, is where I'm from. And New York is when you live in Manhattan, you have access to some pretty great medical care, right? So I would go with my mom to doctor's appointment after doctor's appointment, and nobody could give us a clear sense of what it was that she had. Now, granted, her symptoms were atypical, right? She wasn't like textbook, like Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease for that matter. But we were met with what I have come to call diagnose and adios. Basically, a prescription would like offer their opinion, scribble down a few notes on a prescription pad, send us on our way. One doctor, one psychiatrist actually thought that all of my mom's symptoms were attributable to depression, which I think is, often the case, especially with middle-aged women. 1 in 4 women over the age of 40 these days is on some kind of antidepressant drug.
Yeah.
And so actually took us having to go to Cleveland, Ohio, to the Cleveland Clinic where she was diagnosed with a neurodegenerative condition for the first time. And she was prescribed drugs for both Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. And so that to me was like the line in the sand where I became not just interested, but like obsessed with learning everything I possibly could about diet and lifestyle factors and how they might predispose us to these kinds of chronic conditions that we now see people all over the world suffering from, right? But I focused on dementia and specifically Alzheimer's disease because it's the most common form of dementia. So there's you get the most sort of research on it.
Yeah.
But under the purview of like brain health, you've got cardiovascular health, you've got all these different, sort of fields which are typically siloed off in the world of medicine, right? But for me, I just developed this voracious appetite to understand everything that I possibly could. And I'm not a medical doctor. I didn't go through the academic route, just to be super clear. But this is a journey that began about 10 years ago for me. And it's going to continue for the rest of my life. Like my mom was robbed from me and my family. And I think that in large part, it was due to some kind of toxic exposure in her environment, whether that was via diet, whether that was via her lifestyle. As I mentioned, she wasn't overweight, but my mom's generation, they didn't exercise very regularly, right? My mom wasn't a big believer in, and I'm not saying that this is the cause, but she wasn't a big believer in like organic, so we bought conventional produce, my whole upbringing. So, I mean, that's an area that I've decided.
Yeah, it wasn't like you had something you really point to, like, oh, she was 100 pounds overweight. Maybe that was the issue. Or she was a prize fighter or something where you're like.
Hitting the head.
Yeah, part of the occupation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not just like one thing. And I'll never know what caused this for my mom. But it's led to me ultimately having to leave no stone unturned as I investigate like what it is about our diets and our lifestyles that have become essentially toxic.
You mentioned she was health conscious. So that actually makes me curious because she was paying attention to her health. She must have been paying attention to different things. What was she doing at that time that was conventionally the, I guess, information on health that she was actually partaking in?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. She was health conscious, and she also, the lore of my family was that her dad had died due to heart disease. So my mom was particularly attuned, because she thought her dad died due to heart disease, to the messaging surrounding what it meant to be, what it meant to eat a heart-healthy diet in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, right?
Grains?
Which was like,
low fat,
high grain, low saturated fat, low cholesterol diets, right? If it had a red Heart Healthy logo on it in the supermarket, you could guarantee that it was, at some point, it made its way, into my house. And so I grew up consuming, I remember vividly, like the huge plastic tub of corn oil that we always had by the stove. I remember we never had actual butter in my fridge. It was always margarine in those yellow plastic tubs.
Okay.
Yeah, because it was the heart healthy alternative to animal fats, right?
Yeah.
So many examples. I mean, my mom would load up on grain products because they had no, they were either low fat or had no saturated fat and were cholesterol free. And on top of that, my mom was also a passionate animal rights advocate. So my mom ate a very low animal product diet in general. She never ate any beef ever. Very rarely, if ever, did I see her consume eggs because of the cholesterol contained in the yolks. And occasionally she would eat lean chicken breast. She would eat like fish, because fish we've known for some time has a cardioprotective effect. So yeah, that's kind of like how she lived, high grain, low fat, generally definitely low saturated fat, low cholesterol. And when you cut those kinds of things out of your diet, especially the red meat and all that stuff, what do you replace it with? You replace it with ultra processed, like modern food products, like high grain products, right? And also like for those decades, like that's when the food pyramid was in service, which has now been retired, thankfully. But I mean, that was a paradigm that implored Americans every day to consume 7 to 11 servings of grains, right? And you look at the illustrated version of the food pyramid, and it's like pasta, bread products, and things like that. So, I mean, that's how I was raised, and that's how she ate the majority of her life. And again, I can't like point my finger at her diet and say that's what caused what my mom had.
Yeah,
but it certainly wasn't protective.
The OG pyramid.
Well, and there's what percentage of the population are they starting to estimate that is going to potentially run into Alzheimer's and dementia at this point? Like I've heard some staggering numbers. I don't know if you've heard.
Yeah. Well, today, if you make it to the age of 85, you have a 50% chance. So that's like a coin toss. Like, you want to know your odds of developing Alzheimer's disease? It's a coin toss.
And this is U.S. only? Or
This is
worldwide?
U.S. This is U.S.
Yeah, and I believe they've estimated by like 2030 be half the population by the age of 65.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it? I think today in the U.S., there's about 6 million people with Alzheimer's disease alone. And that number by the year 2050 is set to be triple that. So 6, 12, 18. Yeah. 18 million people.
So there's something's happening.
Something in the environment.
Something's up.
Yeah. It's something in the environment. I mean, that could, the same could be said for cardiovascular disease rates. I mean, cancer, incidence.
Do you think they're all connected? Do you think, because there's some people that believe that heart disease, diabetes, and Alzheimer's are kind of all the same thing-ish?
Yeah. Well, it depends on who you ask and where you look, but generally, I mean, we know that we're becoming more insulin resistant as a society and more obese. Obesity is a huge problem, and if you are obese, your risk for developing certain cancers, for heart disease, for dementia, skyrockets, right? As opposed to somebody who is at a normal, healthy weight. And so, yeah, everything does seem to be connected, whether it's insulin resistance. But there are, with regard to dementia specifically, it's only as of the past couple of years that we've been able to talk about it as a potentially preventable condition. The 2020 Lancet Commission determined that there are about 12 modifiable risk factors for the development of dementia. And so modifiable risk factors are risk factors that fall under your control. Mm-hmm. And just to contrast that, you have non-modifiable risk factors. So non-modifiable risk factors would be, for example, your age, your gender. If you're a female, your risk is twice that of a male's. And your age, your genes, and your gender and your genes. So, and genes is one of these areas where, we're just sort of at the tip of the iceberg in terms of understanding all the different ways that genes play a role. But the most well-defined Alzheimer's risk gene is called the ApoE4 allele, and about 1 in 4 people carry it. And if you have that in the US, that puts you at anywhere between 2 and 14-fold increased risk. But then there's this concept of polygenic risk. So you have different genes that we have yet to describe that might, like in you, cancel out the ApoE4 allele. So it's super complicated stuff.
Quick question about that ApoE4 allele. Is that something that, like, if you did a 23andMe could pop up, or is it you need more specific testing for that?
No, that's actually very easy to figure out whether or not you carry that.
Okay.
But the recommendations that I make don't vary, don't really change depending on whether or not you carry that gene. I might make different recommendations, like in terms of dietary fats, because there's some thinking that ApoE4 carriers don't metabolize saturated fats as well.
Okay.
But in general, I think the modifiable risk factors are where we really have agency, and that's where I think most people should focus their efforts, not on what gene do I have, right?
Okay.
What do you think some of the most agreeable things, just in terms of our health? Like, what are things that are, I guess, the lowest hanging fruit that are modifiable? You think?
Yeah. Well, I think today, people they're eating too many what are called ultra processed foods. I think that's the big thing. When I first started, I was more interested in macronutrients and whether it was low carb or low fat that was more harmful. And then you can get granular with the plant-based versus the carnivore arguments, and are seed oils good or are seed oils bad? But I think ultimately the lowest hanging fruit is to just eat fewer ultra-processed foods and to focus your diet more on the minimally processed whole foods, like the foods that are around the perimeter of the supermarket. And I know people listening to this, your audience is incredibly savvy. They're like, well, that's not rocket science. But the reality is today, 60% of the calories that your average person is consuming, your average adult is consuming, come from these packaged processed convenience foods. Mm-hmm. And that number is even higher for children. For children, it's 70%.
Yeah, and
which is
imagine
insane.
If you could just change that percentage, whatever way you can.
Yeah.
In some small degree that you can, and then maybe over time you progress to improving it more and more over time.
Yeah, improving diet quality. Diet quality, I think, is a massive thing. The diets of most Americans are of such poor quality. And there are obviously there are factors here that play a role that are outside of that can be outside of people's control, like where they live, food access, and things like that, which is important. But generally, once somebody becomes aware of the fact that food quality is important, it also influences the amount of food that you eat, right? Like food quality plays a huge role in terms of like our drive to eat.
Yeah, if you were to change that 60% coming from processed food and turned it down to 50% over time, you'll be encouraged to eat less.
Yeah.
Because you have better quality food. You can make an argument for protein leveraging, and maybe you're eating less calories, and over time you're eating less and less junk.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there was that Kevin Hall study, I believe it was 2018, that found that when people were given access only to an ultra-processed diet, they tended to consume a calorie surplus when eating to satiety, right, of about 500 additional calories. Whereas when it was like a crossover trial, when those people were given access only to a minimally processed food diet, they ended up eating at like a 300 calorie deficit. So right there, that's like an 800 calorie swing determined purely by the quality of the food that you're eating. So a lot of people, when they are on this like weight loss journey and they present to their doctors or their dietitians and they hear the advice, like just eat less, move more, I think what they're not realizing is that what you're eating influences how much you're eating.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's, I think, like probably the lowest hanging fruit.
What were the numbers with kids? You mentioned kids. You mentioned adults are around 60% with processed food. Do you know the numbers for kids?
It's like closer to 70%.
Yeah. And I think kids, and what also pops into my head is our elderly. I think they also have like really poor food choices. I don't really know what it's like as you get older, but I think a lot of people start to complain of like their digestion, and they have a hard time with like maybe something like a steak doesn't go down as smooth, as you get older. So they tend to stick to grains. They tend to stick with kind of quick, easy, cheap foods. Yeah,
it's a big problem, especially like, anabolic resistance is a thing. And, I'm sure you guys have talked about.
What's anabolic resistance?
Well, this is a concept. I think the first time I heard about it was through Gabrielle Lyon, who you guys had on the show. That was a great interview. But yeah, it's this idea that like you become less sensitive to leucine and to like that anabolic stimulus as you get older. I think there are a few mechanisms at play here. I did look into it, and I think it's like part of it has to do with the absorption of amino acids, like the breakdown and absorption of amino acids. But then just generally, your cells become tolerant to various signals. Typically as you get older, right? Like you tend to become a little bit more insulin resistant as you get older. You tend to become a little bit more resistant to various like growth signaling pathways, whether it's like mTOR, IGF-1, et cetera. So all that being said, it becomes crucially important. And for generally anybody on a lower protein diet, protein quality becomes super, super important.
Yeah.
And, there's this argument that you get from the vegan community that when you're eating sufficient protein quality doesn't matter as much. And that might be true if you're eating enough protein. But if you're not eating enough protein, right? Like if you are on a plant-based diet, like, and they tend to underconsume protein.
Yeah.
Or if you're like an elder person, like a senior citizen, and we know that they tend to underconsume protein as well, then that's where protein quality really, can become significant.
There's so much on this protein quality subject that I hope we get to. But on our interview with Dr. Lyon, she mentioned that as far as eating meat, that there haven't been any RCTs or randomly controlled trials on populations that eat high amounts of meat or red meat. And that was partially why she was saying like there's really no proof to show that it's unhealthy. Now, when we put that out on social media, it was actually quite fun to go in the comments. But she was very careful with her words when she mentioned randomly controlled trials versus the typical nutrition studies. And I know that you're a guy who delves into a lot of nutrition studies. But what are people missing when they look at these nutrition studies that show that red meat is unhealthy or meat is unhealthy? What are they missing? Because there are a lot of studies that go over this, but some of them tend to be just kind of trash.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the nutrition is the world of nutrition science is can be a bit of a house of cards built on really crappy data. And most of the data is epidemiologic in nature, meaning it's like looking at populations and, cross-sectional data with various cohorts, looking to see like, okay, what are these people eating? How are they aging? They're not randomized controlled trials, which, by the way, are the kinds of trials required to prove cause and effect. But
a lot of these epidemiological studies, I'm sorry to interrupt, they're in major nutrition journals, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because you can't take a human being and put them on a 80-year-long randomized controlled trial to see and to assess how different dietary patterns lead over the long term in that kind of rigorously controlled setting will lead or contribute to different health outcomes. So you have to look at populations, see how they're eating, and do your best to control for the confounding variables that may be playing a role. For example, like healthy user bias, which is always an issue, always.
Yeah.
Like researchers now, especially with the higher quality data, they do their best to control for things like, when looking at for example, per capita meat consumption, like the GDP, for example, or various other factors. But you just can't escape the fact that like healthy user bias is a real thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and a good example that I like to offer is like, if you were to think about quinoa and you were to look at like all of the people in the United States who eat quinoa on a regular basis, chances are their health is going to be way better than the people who don't regularly eat quinoa, right? And is that because of the quinoa or is it in spite of the quinoa? Maybe the quinoa is having no effect whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
Chances are if you know how to pronounce quinoa, you're health conscious. You're reading health blogs. You like shop at a Whole Foods.
My mom fed me so much quinoa as a kid.
Did she?
Damn. Yeah, dude. My mom was super health conscious. She is super health conscious. So like she was listening to Oprah and Dr. Phil and Dr. Oz, and that's the stuff that they would spout. So,
100%. But I mean, I don't think that study's been done, but I guarantee you, if you were to look at the US and like stratify by like least, people who consume the least amount of quinoa to people who consume the most quinoa, you're going to see a huge health difference.
Mm-hmm.
And so the media might take a headline like that and say quinoa associated with 300% reduced risk of XYZ.
And you could do the same thing with an activity.
You can do the same
be like,
thing.
look at how healthy surfers are.
Yeah.
It's like, well, of course. Like surfing's fucking impossible.
There you
It's
go.
really hard,
There you go. So like, so healthy user bias, like with things that like the population generally considers to be healthy and is like maybe not as easily accessible to people who live in food deserts, that you're going to see like the most healthy user bias there. And then it works the opposite way for meat, because people who tend to consume more meat and like especially processed meat, right? Like processed meat tends to be fast food. It tends to be chicken nuggets, things like that, right? Like they'll use pepperoni pizza as like a surrogate for processed
Not usually
meat.
a charcuterie board.
Right. And so
Just throw that in there.
yeah, so it's like and so you'll regularly see that meat is associated with like worse health outcomes and things like that, but it's for the same reason, just like it's the other side of the coin.
And it's also like those populations that like, let's say the meat that you mentioned, they're also potentially eating in a caloric surplus. They're more likely to be sedentary. That's kind of how that bias is structured into that.
More
correct?
likely not to give a fuck. Eating the fries and the shake with the burger and the bun.
Yeah.
Else.
Yeah. But new research is really coming out, I think, destroying the myth that red meat is unhealthy. Like there was just this paper published in Nature Medicine that came out like 2 or 3 weeks ago that looked at red meat consumption, looked at all available observational data with regard to red meat consumption and 6 health outcomes, including colorectal cancer, 2 types of stroke, so hemorrhagic and ischemic stroke, so the 2 major types of stroke, and there were like a few type 2 diabetes, and they found that there was like no super weak evidence for for basically all of the health outcomes except for stroke, and no evidence that red meat has any association with stroke.
Yeah.
And even when you see these weak, it's just like, because there's like this endless confounding that occurs when looking at observational level data, it's just like you'd have to be a fool to ascribe causality to some of these weak associations that we see. So to me, it's just like, don't base your diet around that kind of data. Base your diet around like common sense and what we know is going to get your body in the best shape that it can be in, and eat the foods that are going to assuage your hunger in the best way that we know that they can.
I like that word.
Yeah.
Assuage.
We
That's
both were like, whoa.
That's an SAT word right there.
Shit, some fanciness. In your book, Genius Kitchen, like, how did you come to find foods that are like brain healthy, and what information is behind some of these foods that might help people's brain, I guess, fire a little stronger, a little faster each and every day?
Yeah, so I call the sort of the top foods that I've identified as giving you the most bang for your buck genius foods, which is not a scientific term, it's a term that I've created, obviously. But these are the foods that I think, like, many of them would repeatedly stand out to me when I would look at dietary patterns like the Mediterranean diet, like the Mind diet. For example, extra virgin olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil is one of these foods that humans have been consuming for thousands of years, because to make extra virgin olive oil, you just crush olives, right? Which is not to make, for example, canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil. Prior to 60 years ago, we hadn't had the machinery or the chemistry labs that are required to make those kinds of fats. But extra virgin olive oil, it's been around in the human food supply for long enough, and we see that it's associated with better cardiovascular health, with better neurological health. We also see in animal studies that there's really compelling data that there's, like, whether it's the phytochemicals or the types of fatty acids found in extra virgin olive oil, that they seem to be really protective. And then RCTs. So, I mean, one of the seminal randomized controlled trials in a field where, as we've talked about, there are so few of these kinds of long-term large population trials, multi-center trials, extra virgin olive oil in the Predimed study was shown to promote, very powerfully, cardiovascular health, neurological health, promote weight loss, even when families were consuming 1 liter a week. So there's a lot of fat to be consuming, right? And nonetheless, seems to be incredibly protective. It's very heat stable. Again, it's got these phytochemicals in it that are pretty potently anti-inflammatory, which we believe is a good thing. So that's like one example. Avocados are another example of a food that I would just see again and again. And also just like in terms of like a food that most people are going to have access to, it's one of these foods is like a perfect brain food. It's got the highest concentration of fat-protecting antioxidants of any fruit or vegetable, and your brain is made of fat. So fat-soluble antioxidants are particularly valuable to the brain, like vitamin E, like carotenoids, like lutein and zeaxanthin. So avocados are another one. I'm a huge fan of eggs for brain health. Eggs, I mean, I mentioned my mom never ate eggs, right?
Is it particular kinds of eggs, or do you what do you buy when you buy eggs? Do you buy fancy eggs, or do you just buy whatever? I have the privilege of being able to buy fancy eggs, but I like to remind people that all eggs, like the cheapest egg, you could go to the supermarket and like the cheapest eggs that you can find are still going to be healthy.
Yeah,
they're still going to be a great source of lutein, zeaxanthin, of vitamin B12, of choline, which we know is so important to.
I believe you're like a 4-egg guy, and I don't like to compare people, but Andrew over there is a 10-egg guy every morning.
10 eggs a day, yeah.
I think he's trying to show off over there.
Damn, that's a flex, bro.
Yeah, 10 eggs in one sitting. It's been kind of incredible.
Wow.
I have dialed it back on the weekends though, because like I'll have 10, and then I just don't want to eat the rest of the day, like till like dinner time. But being around family, they're just like, "Hey, what do we eat?" And I'm like, "Nothing," because we ate a good breakfast. And I'm like, well, we didn't eat 10 eggs, asshole. I'm like, "Oh, my bad. That's right."
I think like 3 to 4 whole eggs. I mean, I'd be curious to know what you guys think about this, but I definitely will add some egg whites in occasionally to the whole eggs just to increase the protein content. Yeah, it's like a bodybuilder trick, right?
Augmenting your meal, I think, is a great idea for a lot of people. Yeah, because I mean, otherwise you're just going to keep increasing the calories of fat, and we know that protein doesn't convert to energy as well. So I think it's a great strategy for a lot of people. Yeah,
so I'll do that. I'll do like depending on like how hungry I am, 2 to 4 eggs, whole eggs, and then I'll throw in some egg whites, just to jack the protein concentration. But yeah, eggs are a cognitive multivitamin. They've got a little bit of everything required to grow a healthy brain. I mean, it's like the beauty of Mother Nature. Mother Nature has devised like the perfect care package to grow a nervous system.
Eggs are so good. Do you have particular ways you like to prepare them?
I love poaching them. Poaching
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Takes some patience, but that's amazing.
A little bit, yeah. In Genius Kitchen, I have a really simple like instruction like how to, because I think there's no oil required to poach eggs, and all you need is like a little saucepan. So you don't need to mess with any of those like non-stick pans to poach eggs. So to me, it's like a really great, I love doing that. I'll occasionally scramble them, but yeah, I buy like pastured eggs if I can find them. If not, the omega-3 eggs are next in line for me. So omega-3 enriched eggs.
What about something like ketones? Is there like real research behind ketones? Like being able to help with dementia, Alzheimer's. Some people say even cancer. There's some speculation on like, what's your experience with that, and what are your thoughts on that?
So the ketogenic diet is interesting with regard to Alzheimer's disease because what happens in the brain of somebody with Alzheimer's disease is you see a phenomenon called glucose hypometabolism. So the ability of the brain to generate ATP from glucose is diminished by about 50%. And the brain is an energetic like beast. You know, the brain makes up 2 to 3% of your body's mass, but it counts for 25% of your body's basal metabolic rate. So it's like its energy is incredibly important, right? In fact, they think that that's why we became omnivorous. Actually, it was to be able to supply energy to the ravenous human brain. It's called the expensive tissue hypothesis. So like if you look at gorillas, they have like these vast GI tracts. But ours became more efficient over time, and meat helped us get there, right? Because it required less time eating and digesting food because it's
Vegans are coming for you, dog.
Yeah, they will always. Yeah,
They'll always win.
There's nothing I can say to get them off my back, because even when I promote the consumption of vegetables, which I do regularly, right? They don't. It's not like they praise me for that. You know, they're just like, I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. With vegans, it's wild. Yeah, But yeah, anyway, so in the brain of somebody with Alzheimer's disease, you see this stark glucose hypometabolism. And despite that, the brain's ability to generate energy from ketones, which are a byproduct created via fat metabolism, is unperturbed. So the idea is that for somebody who already has the condition, supplying the brain with ketones can actually effectively keep the lights on, so to speak. In the brain. And we have a number of small trials that have suggested that ketogenic interventions, whether it's with ketogenic supplements, there's actually a ketogenic food product that's been FDA approved to treat dementia. I don't know how effective it is, but it's called Axona. It's like an MCT oil-based, super purified, standardized food product. Or ketogenic dietary interventions have been shown to improve functional capacity in patients with Alzheimer's disease. And that's a cohort for which like there really is very little hope in terms of pharmaceutical help, because it's like once you have Alzheimer's disease, I mean, that's a disease process that's already like decades set into motion. There
currently isn't any real pharmaceutical help that people have identified as being really helpful, right?
Yeah, there's nothing. I mean, there's a few drugs that work to modulate different neurotransmitters, but they're not very effective. I mean, my mom was on both of them, and I don't believe that they helped her in any significant way. And there was a drug that recently made headlines called lecanemab, which might slow progression a little bit, but the side effects are pretty awful. From the drug side of things, like. And also, Alzheimer's drug trials have a 99.6% fail rate. So it's like
Jesus.
Why wouldn't something like modafinil or something like that work?
Well, first of all, there's no such thing as a biological free lunch, and so I would want to know, like, to my knowledge, that hasn't been tested in Alzheimer's patients, but yeah, I don't know, like, it might provide like a temporary, momentary boost. Like, why don't they just like give somebody with dementia like a lot of caffeine? But I just think it's like there's like a those kinds of drugs can be like a double-edged sword.
Do the supplemental ketones, like, have you heard people, because you've been talking about this topic for a while.
Yeah.
You made a documentary. The documentary's not available yet, or you're getting close?
It's not out yet. It's called Little Empty Boxes, but people that are interested in the film could go to littleemptyboxes.com and see a trailer and sign up to our mailing list for like updates and stuff.
So with you talking about this a lot, has somebody come to you and say, hey, we've tried ketone esters with my mom or my uncle or my grandpa, and it's like working great, or have you not really heard much of that?
It may help. It may help. I don't want to make like strong claims, and it's not a cure, but one person, Mary Newport, has been advocating for the use of ketone-based therapeutics for a while. Her husband, Steve Newport, had Alzheimer's disease. He passed away some years ago, but she's a physician, and she would routinely give him coconut oil and saw a significant improvement over time in his cognition. And so hypothetically, these kinds of ketone supplements could work to some degree, you know, whether it's like, you know, improving functional capacity for somebody with Alzheimer's disease. More research needs to be done, but the thing about ketones, they're not just a fuel source, right, that can potentially keep the engines going for somebody with Alzheimer's disease, but they also act like a signaling mechanism that has been shown to help support blood flow to the brain. Ketones have been shown to boost blood flow to the brain, and also improve increase levels of BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So ketones do seem to have all of these different beneficial things that they do for the brain. They change the neurochemistry of the brain. There's no other diet that does that. Like there's no other, you know, whether it's like the carnivore diet or the you know, a plant-based diet, a ketogenic diet actually changes the chemistry of the brain in a really significant way. And I think for that reason, we have to pay attention to it, and we have to continue to study it for conditions like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, et cetera. I mean, it's been used as a therapeutic diet for certain types of epilepsy for a century at this point. Yeah. So we know that this isn't a fad diet, right? Like this is a diet that has like profound implications for the brain. Obviously, in the wellness world, people have taken that diet and run with it as like the ultimate weight loss diet.
Trying to make fucking cupcakes out of it and stuff.
Exactly.
It's like, settle down.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's so, you know, that I think in many ways that's kind of hurt actually how serious of a diet this is, and like and the potential benefits of it, right? And it's also associated now, like you have the vegan like diet, the vegans coming after it as well, because it tends to be associated with like meat consumption, and so that can kind of like hurt its, you know, its public image. But yeah, I think it's super important. We need to continue talking about it.
You know, I've heard you talk about the amyloid hypothesis before, and if you can explain what that is, that'd be helpful. But along with that, there are probably listeners who have a relative that has Alzheimer's or has dementia, and maybe they're going down some route right now. They're using certain medications. But what would you suggest? I know it's always a dangerous thing because not a doctor, but you have massive amounts of experience in this. What would you suggest for somebody to try to help that relative do that they can apply right now today to maybe mitigate certain things or move them in the right direction?
Yeah, good question. So the first part, the amyloid hypothesis, basically is we don't know what causes Alzheimer's disease. I don't know what causes Alzheimer's disease. Nobody does. And what causes Alzheimer's disease for one person might be different for the next person. Because once you've seen, you know, in the field of neurology, they say once you've seen one case of dementia, you've seen one case of dementia. There's probably different routes, you know, up that mountain for each person. But the amyloid hypothesis really has been the sort of guiding target for pharmaceutical inquiry for the past, I would say, since the disease was named in 1906 by Alois Alzheimer. And that is that amyloid beta plaques, which accumulate in the space around neurons, is the cause of Alzheimer's disease. That if we can find a way to get rid of these plaques, you can see it. If we can get rid of these plaques, we'll be able to cure the condition, right? And so that's the amyloid hypothesis, that the plaques and to a lesser degree the tangles are the cause of Alzheimer's disease. But the problem with that is that people have amyloid in their brains that don't have Alzheimer's disease. Amyloid is, in many ways, first of all, it's produced in our brains naturally. Like it's not necessarily pathologic, at least at first. It could be our brain's response to, you know, inflammatory threat, for example. And also, drugs that have succeeded at reducing the amyloid burden in the brain haven't cured Alzheimer's disease. And this was most recently shown with a drug called aducanumab, that was greenlit by the FDA, despite the fact that on a panel of 11 people, 8 of 9 experts told the FDA not to approve this drug because it succeeded at reducing amyloid but didn't improve symptoms.
So 9 of 11 said don't do it, and
don't do it.
Still did it.
They still did it. Yeah,
Fun.
Crazy. So aducanumab, there you go. So it's a huge problem, and you see, and all of these different associations are like invested in this hypothesis. So many reputations in science are invested in this hypothesis, but it doesn't seem to be the case that this is the cause of the condition. Amyloid is certainly there, but the question that researchers need to be asking and are starting to ask is, what put amyloid there to begin with? Was it maybe the glucose hypometabolism? Was it maybe some kind of environmental exposure? Was it maybe inflammation, right? Like just low-grade chronic inflammation that so many people are suffering from these days.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so I mean, that's the whole issue with the amyloid hypothesis. For somebody with Alzheimer's disease who has amyloid in their brains already, I would say that the primary focus should be from a diet and lifestyle standpoint. I mean, exercise is medicine for the brain. We know that exercise can potentially help slow the condition. We know that exercise helps grow the hippocampus. It's one of the few interventions that can help grow the memory center of the brain.
Yeah.
And the hippocampus is an incredibly vulnerable structure and one of the first structures to be affected by Alzheimer's disease. It typically declines about 0.1 to 0.3% per year, but exercise can actually grow it by that amount.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, I'm curious, do you know, because you've probably paid attention to in people who have Alzheimer's at this point, but do you see many people who get Alzheimer's who have been consistently exercising up until that point in their life? Do you see that often, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. You know, it's hard to say because, like, we know that exercise is protective.
Mm-hmm.
We know that diet is protective. We know that if you adopt a brain healthy diet and lifestyle, that you're really doing a lot in terms of lowering your risk, right? Another big thing is keeping your blood pressure healthy. That's massive. High blood pressure is a major risk factor for dementia. And we now have a number of seminal trials that are showing us, whether it's like the finger study that was run out of the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, that a diet and lifestyle intervention, so eating a primarily whole foods diet, exercising more, staying socially engaged, can help dramatically not just reduce risk for cognitive decline, even if you're already old and at risk, but you can see about a 25% improvement in cognitive function if you eat a healthier diet that includes fish and green leafy vegetables and berries and things like that, extra virgin olive oil, and exercise. So yeah, you can see an improvement in cognitive function and potentially, whether we're preventing or kicking the can down the road, it does seem to, reduce risk for developing, more severe forms of cognitive impairment. And then there was another study that came out, we don't have many of these. So it's like, I know them and I reference them because they're so important. Mm-hmm. So there was the finger study, and then there was the Sprint Mind trial that showed that for people who were aggressively treated for high blood pressure, that they saw a significant risk reduction for mild cognitive impairment. So you have people with hypertension, right? High blood pressure. You put them on, the two arms were either like a moderate and a more strict intervention to bring their blood pressure down to a normal, healthy range. And those that were in the most sort of had the most, there you go. Yeah, with lower, the more they were able to lower their BP while still keeping it in a healthy range. Mm-hmm. They were able to prevent mild cognitive impairment, which is like pre-dementia. So, and like exercise, we know thanks to meta-analyses, exercise is just as effective at helping to promote healthy blood pressure as drugs.
Yeah.
So, but still people, I get comments all the time on social media like, well, my father exercised his whole life and still developed dementia. Uh-huh. And so it's really important to say that we don't have all the answers. And that, you can exercise your whole life, but if your diet is like, really poor, maybe that's potentially canceling out the exercise, or, maybe it was some toxic exposure, or maybe, early in life he was like hit on the head a few times, which is a risk factor, or maybe there were, there's all these different. It
still doesn't change the fact that, okay, it's unfortunate they got it, but it still doesn't change the fact that exercise can still help.
Yes.
You to degrade slower, or for you to prevent it from getting worse.
100%. Yeah. Exercise really is the most powerful. I would say, I think diet's important. I would put them both on the same playing field, to be honest. But I think, exercise really is like, it's one of the most powerful. Like if we had a drug like that could do for the brain what exercise can do for the brain, like it would be a, blockbuster, multi-billion-dollar drug. You know,
Does it matter what kind of exercise? Has there been a difference between like walking, jogging, and like lifting? Any ideas on that?
yeah, I think both are important. There was a study that just came out that looked at, it was a meta-analysis actually, and it looked at both aerobic exercise and resistance training. And it found that resistance training was the most effective at slowing cognitive decline.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Why?
You know, I think because of what it does hormonally and like for the insulin side of things, like the blood sugar regulation side of things, the blood pressure, you know, lowering effect. I think cardio is great. I think cardio is super important. But I think
It just doesn't take that much thought either. So maybe just like thinking about how you're executing an exercise is similar to like if we were throwing a football back and forth. I mean, you got to kind of pay attention, otherwise it's going to hit you right in the face.
yeah, with resistance training.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
There's a little more thought involved. Central nervous system is being targeted rather than just your aerobic system.
Yeah, and also like it allows you to stay mobile and it fights off frailty. You know, I would say that you can still, if all you were doing is cardio, you can still be pretty frail.
Oh yeah.
You know, as a you know aerobic athlete, if unless you integrate resistance training on a regular basis. And I think studies are starting to show that it's frailty really that is like the major enemy, especially as we get into later life. And that fighting off frailty and resistance training, I mean, it's a because the brain thrives when it is atop a mobile body, right? Like the brain atop a sedentary or an immobilized body is really suffering in ways that are both visible and invisible. And I think that insofar as resistance training can support your, you know, your ambulatory ability like throughout life and like help prevent falls and things like that. I think that's where resistance training really does have the upper hand. There's been this bias in the literature, I think, for aerobic training for a long time, and I really do think that it's because it's just a lot easier to get a mouse to run on a treadmill, right? And then to like look.
Yeah, mice hate bench pressing. You said something like that on Rogan. I was like, that's the greatest thing I ever heard. These fucking stupid mice, they won't bench.
They won't bench, yeah. They should spend like an afternoon with you guys, right? That's right. Imagine what you guys could do with a mouse.
Come on, man. At least hit up some dumbbell incline presses or something. Got to work those pecs.
Yeah.
Dude, what about a weighted wheel? Is that a possibility if like the mouse
they've got to push a sled?
Yeah.
But like what if the mouse wheel had like a little bit of resistance to it where now they had to
they just hate lifting, bro.
Yeah.
They hate lifting. They hate lifting.
Yeah, Nsima wants to see a world where mouses have big old quads from a resistant wheel.
Let's go.
Conan wheel.
Wheel. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I think integrating both. I mean, yeah, like resistance training, super, super important. And then cardio, cardio, we know we have really good data. In humans too, we do have really good data on cardio. And the resistance training is like fairly novel, but it is starting to come out and be pretty convincing.
Cardiovascular training seems to be a little bit more important as people get older too.
Cardiovascular training?
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to have like a good aerobic base. Like we were having this conversation earlier. Like I think, it's like if you're able to achieve like a hulking like muscular physique, but you're winded going up a flight of stairs, like I like to frame sort of my I've recently started framing like my wellness routine around like if you had to make yourself harder to kill, like what would you have to do, And I think that if you can't go up a flight of stairs or run a mile without much effort, I think that's not like, like you're not really doing yourself any favors. So I've started, and I hate running personally. So, this is like, I'm kind of like hyping myself up as I say this, but like I've tried to dedicate like 3 days a week to running a mile. And some days I'll be able to run more. Like I've gotten to the point where now I can run 2 miles fairly comfortably. And the big problem for me is mental. Like it's the mental hurdle. It's like I'm just bored as hell, like running.
Stare at the shoes.
Yeah. I just don't like it. Like there's only so many times I can listen to my workout playlist, like or whatever, as I'm running. But I try no matter, even with my increased conditioning, I don't raise the bar for myself because then it's going to inevitably get to a point where I'm like, I'd rather not do it than have to run the 2 miles or the 3 miles. If I could just run a mile, to me, that's like I've accomplished something, And so, that's a good, like, I don't know, for anybody who's like listening who just hates doing cardio, like I really don't like doing cardio, but I've like the mile 2 or 3 times a week for me, if I can do that, It's not really like an evidence-based like recommendation, but
in terms of
worked for me.
Dementia and things like that, is there any information on like people just staying active with like reading, crossword puzzles, or like problem solving? You know, are those things impactful as well?
Yeah, you want to keep your brain active. You in so doing, you build what's called a cognitive reserve. So the more, it's like, I forget the saying exactly, but it's like, you know, the more you have to lose, the longer it'll take to lose it, or something like that. You know, so you really do want to build your mental faculties. But generally, the rule of thumb is you want whatever it is that you're engaging in to be fairly complex, right? With something like Sudoku, the general thinking is like, the more you do Sudoku, you tend just to get better at doing Sudoku, right? You want what you're engaging with to have like, to draw on as wide of an array of cognitive processes as possible. And so that's where, like, for example, you know, like really complex like RPG video games might play a supportive role, or just staying socially active in general, or learning to play an instrument, or learning a new language. Those tend to have what's called like a spillover effect, where, yeah, you're just learning a new language, or you're learning to play guitar or whatever, but that's going to actually have a spillover effect and boost your cognition in other areas as well, and subsequently boost what's called the cognitive reserve.
Mm-hmm. I do wonder if something like, you know, we have a bias towards jiu-jitsu on the podcast since Andrew just started also.
Nice.
But it makes you wonder, with something like that, a physical activity like that is so different, grappling in and of itself, that you know, you wonder if something like that could also be beneficial as far as an activity to help somebody keep sharp, because you're learning new movements all the time, and it's literally like a different bodily language. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's like, that could almost be considered like a third category of exercise, which is like essentially skill-based training. You know, you're coordinating, like it's like hand-eye coordination, mind-body coordination. You're coordinating your upper body with your lower body. I've never done jiu-jitsu, but I took up boxing about 1.5 years ago.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and that was I could see right away the cognitive benefits of boxing, because I'm not an athlete, as I mentioned. So I
try to throw a combination. You're like, huh? How do I do that?
Yeah. I mean, that was a big thing for me. That was like a fairly heavy lift, no pun intended. Like, you know, like learning the combos and things like that. But I feel like it, you know, and again, anecdotal, but it's like, I feel like it's helped my brain. And generally, we know that like these kinds of things, like skill-based training, where you're, you know, coordinating different body movements and things like that, they're just much more complex movements to master than like the simple bench press. I mean, I know that like mastering a bench press is not as simple as it seems either, but like, yeah, these like jiu-jitsu or boxing, I think, can potentially be very beneficial. Not a ton of research that I'm aware of with regard to like dementia and stuff, but yeah, I would surmise that probably very beneficial.
How do we get ourselves just out of this? Like, it seems like there's like a health crisis going on. It seems like people are very sick. Obesity is still on the rise, even though we sit here and talk about fitness all day long.
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas, or, you know, have you thought about this a lot? Like, in terms of, do you think it would be good to get into our education system, or like, what do you think are things that would be helpful?
I mean, I think education is key. I'm not opposed to like putting warning signs on junk food, like the way they do with cigarettes in the UK. Or in the EU, they put like, literally you can see like a diseased lung like on a pack of cigarettes, and it does a pretty good job. Yeah, I like telling you what the consequences are of consistent cigarette smoking. You know?
I think they've also taxed sugar, like they've taxed, you know, certain drinks and things like that.
Yeah,
in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all about like letting people decide for themselves. What most people don't have is the information that allows them to make an informed decision, right? Like, I think that if most people knew that fruit juice was literally just sugar water, you know what I'm saying?
This guy gained like 12 pounds. Having like I don't know, pineapple juice or something.
Just having gallons of juice. And we wish we could say like, oh yeah, this was like 10 years ago when he wasn't as aware. But no, this shit was like 10 days ago.
Listen, don't lose your train of thought. Please, don't lose your train of thought. What happened? We always talk about not drinking your fucking calories. This is like the 5th time I've told this damn story. But like 3 weeks ago, I was like, you know what? Fuck it. Let me see what happens if I just start drinking a little juice, you know, just like have a cup here and there. Because it was so good, I couldn't just keep it to a cup on certain days. And after a week, because I overconsumed the juice because it was so good, I gained like 12 pounds.
Maybe it was muscle though. Could have been muscle.
Dog, I haven't been 258 pounds since like in years. I haven't touched that weight. And I was like, you know what? I see why we don't drink juice, because we're not adult enough to have small portions.
Small portions.
It is delicious.
It is so
It is.
delicious.
Favorite juice, pineapple juice?
Actually, I had the Simply Lemonade ones, but they have this Simply Watermelon, which was lower in calories. Don't make the jokes. It was lower in calories, so I decided to go with that one. And it tasted lighter, but even so, I just overconsumed it because it was so fucking good.
Yeah.
That's why we tell you don't drink your calories.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I love grapefruit juice. Is like,
Ooh.
yeah, grapefruit juice is the shit.
So you drink some juice here and there?
No, I mean I don't, because I don't bring it into my house. But occasionally, like occasionally post workout, like I'll have but it's pretty rare actually. Yeah, I'm generally like, I would say the only time I'm really these days drinking my calories, so to speak, is like I put like the heavy cream in my coffee, which we've talked about.
Yeah.
And I'll drink like a smoothie occasionally. I have like a like a smoothie recipe that's like doing pretty well in California. There's like this place called Earth Bar. You guys familiar with it? It's if you live in California, there's a few in San Francisco, there's a bunch in LA, but I have a smoothie with them. It's like one of the rare smoothies that doesn't have frozen banana in it. It's just like all low glycemic, like blueberries and avocado and things like that. Vanilla whey, protein.
It's probably really good, huh?
It's pretty good.
Good.
Tastes like an oatmeal cookie. It's pretty good. So I'm not a big smoothie person, but like if it's just like a berry based smoothie with some whey protein, yeah, I'm in.
See, but that's pretty filling. It has some fiber in it.
You got the
know?
fiber, yeah.
Yeah, but normal juice, you could just put that shit down.
Yeah.
I made you lose your train of thought.
All right, back to saving the world.
Save the world.
America, anyway.
I don't know, man. I think like I'm a huge fan. Like podcasts like this, I think are a huge public service. You know, like there's a lot of people on social media these days that are like, that love to hate on whether it's like, diet book authors or health podcasters. I think that it's a great public service to have many different on-ramps for people to get people interested in health and nutrition. And to spread this message of like empowering health, right? Because a lot of people think that healthcare is something that happens when you go to a doctor's office. That's sick care. Healthcare is what happens when you're negotiating with yourself to get off the couch and head to the gym, when you're pushing your shopping cart, through the supermarket. Like that's where
something we
healthcare-
should be practicing and working on every day.
Exactly. Like it's a lifestyle. And I think that like it's amazing, like having podcasts, and like I have my own podcast that where I try to do this, and what you want to do ultimately is lead audiences to like be able to form their own questions and lead their own inquiries and investigate their own topics and things like that. Like that's something that I've aspired to be for people, because again, I didn't go through the traditional channels, but I armed myself with information because I had a very important personal vested interest in gaining that information. That was my mom, right? So for me, it's really important to just like if I could be anything to people, it's like to be an example, so that people then feel empowered to go out and do their own research and ask their own questions and things like that. Not necessarily to take everything that I say as gospel. Like that's not my MO. My MO is really just to like be able to arm people with information, and then if they want to take if what I've shared with them and then vet that or integrate it and see how that affects them and then tinker and iterate, to me that's I think like that's like a job well done. But yeah, I think ultimately like arming people with information so that it's informed consent. Like I think most people like when they open up, for example, like whether it's like the bottle of watermelon juice or the pint of ice cream, right? And like they intend on only having like a spoonful, and before they know it, they're looking at the bottom of the pint, right? It's most people
That's
don't.
us.
Every time.
It's just that most people don't realize that like those foods are designed to be overconsumed. So it's not a moral failure. Like it's not a moral failure if like you can't moderate your consumption of foods that are literally designed not to be consumed moderately, right? It's not a moral failure. It's like you did exactly what you were supposed to do in that instance. So for people to kind of like to have that information, to know how food affects their behavior, I think that's like one of the major I think, obstacles. Like if we can overcome that and get this information out to more people, then more people will be inclined to act on that knowledge.
And a lot of times people will say, I'm just not that guy. I can't do that. I can't be like you. I can't. And I think what sometimes people are maybe not paying attention to is it's like, who struggles with these foods? Everybody.
Yeah.
Pretty much everybody has an issue with these foods. Pretty much everybody has an issue with social media to some extent. It's made to be addicting. It's made for you to be on there for too long. And it's easy to point to like our children and kids and be like, oh my God, all these kids, they're on TikTok and they're all this stuff for way too long. But meanwhile, we're like, oh no, let me just finish this one last email. This is work related. Like what I'm doing is super important.
Yeah.
I'm not messing around the way that you are. But I think we just lose sight of the fact that so many of these things are very, very difficult. And we need to set up rules and parameters around us. So I agree that there's definitely has to be like education, but there has to be like a practical education so people can apply it. And then I also agree that it's helpful to have Dr. Baker. It's helpful to have a Paul Saladino. It's helpful to have a Lane Norton. And you get these people in all these different fields so people can be like, I don't really vibe with that guy, but that makes sense. I think I can do some of that. Oh, that guy's recommending some 10-minute walks. I can at least figure that out. I don't know about the diet thing, but I can at least figure out to go on some walks.
Yeah, 100%. Like, and I like the evidence-based folks. Like I learn from them all the time, as much as they, not all of them, but a small minority of them like love to come after me. They tend to have a vegan slant, so they love to like,
the fuck's wrong with these people? You're a nice guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Dude, I don't know.
Vegans, we do love you. Sometimes you're just very mean to us.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. But I learn from everybody. Like I particularly seek out those that have different opinions than my own. So that I can look, whether it's like looking into their sources or just challenging my own assumptions about various things. I think that's crucially important.
Yeah.
Crucially important.
Within this whole field too, there's you talked a bit about olive oil, and we were able to talk about that a bit, how it's so beneficial. But when it does come to other oils, specifically seed oils, to be honest, we've had a bunch of people that have come onto the podcast. Some are like, oh, it's the devil, whatever. But, when we look at the practical approach, I don't keep seed oils in the house. I don't cook with them. If I go out to a restaurant, I will eat whatever the fuck I want to eat because I know that I'm not over consuming it. How do you look at seed oils? Like, are we missing it because we're actually intaking it when we eat out? Like, is it as important as people say it is?
To be honest, my approach is identical to yours. I don't bring them into my house. Why would you? I mean, I use extra virgin olive oil. Also, the Mind diet, which is an imperfect sort of dietary pattern, but it's the one that, there's good epidemiologic evidence on that being associated with reduced risk for cognitive decline. The only oil that is recommended in that dietary pattern is extra virgin olive oil. If you go to the Mediterranean region of the world, they're not using extra virgin olive oil. There's no, as far as I know, long-lived population for whom which seed oils make up a significant part of the diet.
Yeah.
They have no flavor profile. They are, right there. Martha Claire Morris herself created the Mind diet out of Rush University. Rest her soul. She passed away, but I got to interview her and meet her a bunch of times.
Mind stand for something?
It is the Mediterranean intervention. It's a combination of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. The DASH diet is a dietary approach to stop hypertension. So that's, as I mentioned, hypertension is a big risk factor for dementia. So if you can get a normal healthy blood pressure and integrate foods like extra virgin olive oil, dark leafy greens, fish, stuff like that, that seems to be a very evidence-based approach. Where I've sort of tweaked it is, these approaches tend to be very grain-based, but I don't think that the Mediterranean diet is beneficial because of grains. I think it's beneficial in spite of grains.
Okay.
I'm not saying that grains are bad or anything like that, but I think that like you can improve it by reducing grain consumption, especially here in the States. Grains tend to be ultra processed and empty calories for most people. And I also think that I'm also pretty unapologetic in embracing red meat as a brain healthy food. I think that red meat is very beneficial. But going back to seed oils, so there's no good reason to integrate them. I mean, that's like starting at like level 1. There's no good reason to introduce them into your diet. If you have extra virgin olive oil, and if you have avocado oil, which is like a close second in terms of like a good, solid cooking oil with like no flavor profile. But I do think that we do need to look at these oils critically, as they are novel foods that didn't exist in the human food supply prior to less than 100 years ago. And we know that our diets are now saturated in these kinds of fats, which are chemically very unstable. They're often oxidized at the point of sale, and when we consume them, in restaurants, or when we cook with them, and when we heat and reheat them, that oxidation process further continues, or accelerates rather. We know that various oxidation byproducts, like certain aldehydes, are not healthy. They're mutagenic, cancer, can potentially be cancer causing. And so, yeah, novel food. And also with regard to the brain, it's a vast experiment being played out on a huge stage.
Oh, shit.
And we do not know the potential brain consequences of, regularly integrating these kinds of fats into our diet. At the turn of the century, they made up about less than 2.5%, I think, of our total daily calories. And now they're about 7.5%. So we're consuming about 3 times as much, in terms of their calorie contribution. And yeah, we don't know like what they're doing to the brain. The brain is made up of polyunsaturated fats for the most part, omega-6 and omega-3 fats. The brain also happens to be a crucible for oxidative stress. And then you're regularly ingesting these fats that are stripped from their whole food form. They're deprived of the antioxidants that they're normally bound with in whole foods. We're heating them, we're cooking with them, we're, keeping them out exposed to oxygen, and then we're ingesting them. I just don't think it's, without making any crazy claims, I think that we need to just have a little bit of caution about them, Now, granted, when people become more mindful of them and they start cutting them out, they're going to be cutting out a lot of ultra-processed foods, So a lot of people who cut out seed oils, they're going to see a health improvement regardless of whether or not it was the seed oil itself that was contributing to whatever symptoms they were feeling. I think in the hierarchy of things that are important, I would agree that minimizing the ultra-processed foods in general, the added sugar, the refined grain products, and the ultra-processed seed oils as a whole, I think that's probably should be priority number 1. And then, obviously like exercise and making sure that your sleep is on point. All those I think are probably a lot more important than like just isolating the seed oils and going after that. But I do think that I do think that they play a role.
Yeah.
When you produce them, you create a small but significant amount of trans fats in these oils, and they might not be acutely inflammatory, but again, chronically, I don't think we know. And we do know that they, first of all, there's no the nutritional and medical orthodoxy, I think, loves them because compared to saturated fat, they will reduce LDL cholesterol. But meta-analyses don't show that coincides with any outcome-based improvement. Like there's no, like their use is not associated with reduced risk for cardiovascular disease or anything like that. So again, I just don't see any valid reason to incorporate them. And I choose to avoid them.
Have you personally had any like health issues? Like, have you been overweight? Have you, gotten your blood work done before and had it be way off? Like, did you have to have an intervention yourself at some point, or because you got into lifting at a young age, was it not really as problematic for you?
Yeah, I haven't had like any major health issues. I did have actually, earlier this year, I had some weird like nerve thing. And I realized that I learned that I have like migraines occasionally, which has been like a weird thing to like, because I always thought like I would have the occasional headache and that was just normal. But I had some kind of like migraine associated like nerve issue on my face, actually, like something called Horner syndrome like emerged, which is like this super rare thing that usually is caused by bad stuff, like either like brain tumor or like lung mass, but it can also be associated with migraines. And I found out that I have migraines. And actually, incidentally, going back to the seed oil conversation, there was a randomized control trial that was performed that found that when people reduce seed oil intake and increase their omega-3 intake, that the severity of headaches actually goes way down. The severity and frequency of headaches goes way down. And I remember at the time when this like nerve thing for me happened, I was like eating out in restaurants like a lot more So again, it's like I can't like necessarily point my finger at that, but yeah, from like a brain health standpoint, I do think it's like worth being mindful of, like the like one's sort of overall seed oil consumption. But yeah, other than that, no major like health problems to speak of.
Have you moved in and out of different diets over the years? Have you been, because you're following, I imagine you're following like the trends a little bit, and you're kind of keeping your eye on some of the things. So maybe over the years, when you were maybe ripping out stuff out of the magazines and like going to the gym and trying some of these exercises or whatever, maybe over that time, maybe you were like, oh, let me try keto. Let me try this. Have you messed around and actually like kind of gone into some of those, or have you been a little bit more general?
Yeah. I've I think like my first major dietary iteration was I cut out like the refined grains, and I would only eat whole grains. And so that was like for many years. I was like, I wouldn't go near white rice, but I would go to town on brown rice. Yeah, and like I wouldn't eat white bread, but I would like, if you put like whole wheat bread in front of me, I would like,
Ew.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah, no, for many years.
Yeah.
That was like my, hadn't really looked into it too much further.
Yeah, they were saying they were like slower carbohydrates, slower digesting, more fiber, things like that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe like a little bit of hesitation with like the red meat stuff, So like kind of like another like iteration of like what it was that my mom, ascribed to for most of her life. But then when I really started to dive in, I became a little bit more carb conscious at first, bordering on maybe a little carb phobic at first. And I would do like keto and, I avoided all grains for a time, and I wouldn't do like legumes. I cut out the bread and the gluten and all that stuff. There were like a good couple of years where I was probably like very regularly in and out of ketosis, save for maybe the occasional like fruit, whole fruit. But now I think my diet's settled to a much more moderate place where I will occasionally eat, I eat like white rice with sushi, and if I'm at like damn.
Yeah. I love sushi.
Yeah. I love sushi, dude. Yeah. You'll never be able to take sushi away from me. And there was a time when I wouldn't touch sushi if it didn't have brown rice.
But,
really? Yeah.
Oh, it's kind of a hard combination to find too.
I know, it's pretty rare. But no, now I regularly eat sushi. I love like
some sushi chefs just got, thrown off. They're like, brown rice. Like, what the fuck?
I know. I love like Latin American food, so if I'm at a restaurant, it's like there's rice and beans on the table, like I'll have some of that. I've become a lot less dogmatic. I tend to still stay away from like wheat and gluten containing grains and things like that. I don't eat a lot of pasta. I'll occasionally eat like some of the legume pastas. But
you're not really phobic of anything, I'd imagine. Like you'll have a beer or some wine or something like that.
Yeah, I love wine. I don't really drink beer. Beer to me is like liquid bread. So I don't. Yeah, it's pretty much.
That's actually a good descriptor.
Yeah, but I'll do wine occasionally, some tequila. I don't really like drinking that much, but I am single, and so when I go on those first dates,
I think eventually you get old enough and white enough to where you're like, I'm gonna have an IPA.
Maybe.
Give me a triple IPA.
I don't know a white man who doesn't like IPAs.
Oh, no.
Like that actually
I don't like them, but like my friends are like, well, you get older. You don't understand yet. I'm like, how much older do I need to be?
It's the whitest drink.
Do you guys know anybody that makes their own IPAs and stuff? I've never had it, but from what I understand, everyone's always like, yeah, they work really hard on it, but you drink it and it's just like tastes like dirt and like there's all kinds of shit inside of it.
So, my brother-in-law's made all kinds of different things.
That's
but
right.
I don't know.
He's legit though.
Oh yeah, he's legit as fuck. I don't know if I've ever had a beer that he's made, but I'm sure he would be excited to make one for me. He'd be all pumped up.
I'm sure he would make a really good beer though.
Yeah. No. He makes really good everything.
Interesting.
Yeah. What has there been any research or anything on like alcohol and like weed when it comes to dementia and Alzheimer's? Because I mean, it does seem like in the present moment, like, if you're a burnout and you can't remember shit, like, well, fuck, when does that stop? Or how much worse is that going to get, right?
Yeah. Weed, weed is a little outside my wheelhouse, and I have a bias because weed doesn't work with my brain really. So I haven't I generally like avoid like weed related stuff, When
you say it doesn't work through your brain, what do you mean? I'm curious.
Yeah, I've always like wished that I could be like one of these functional smokers because a lot of or not smokers, but like somebody who derives creative value from THC, because I have some friends that are able to, or even social value from it. But for me, it makes me like incredibly paranoid, incredibly like introverted. It's just like, the ego chatter that
It's hilarious that you're like jealous, like you want,
you
want to be able to get high and be creative.
Looks like a good time.
It used to hit me like that when I was younger. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I got super paranoid. The first time I smoked, I thought I was going to run into the street and die, dog. It was the worst night of my life.
Yeah. It makes me feel psychotic. I don't like it. I'll take like a small dose maybe sometimes to like turn off if I've had like a really busy day and I want to get to sleep. And it works for me for that, for that purpose. But generally, no. I'm a much bigger fan of like, I think psilocybin is great, like small, low dose psilocybin personally. But yeah, weed is not I generally don't like spend a lot of time looking into weed. But alcohol, I think, is pretty noxious from a brain health standpoint. And I do drink it occasionally. Just to be transparent, but like there was a study that came out because we've been told for a long time that moderate drinking is actually beneficial, but what this one paper came out found that even moderate drinkers had 3 times the hippocampal atrophy, so atrophy in the hippocampus, compared to alcohol abstainers.
Did it matter what type of alcohol it was?
I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters.
What about red wine?
Resveratrol.
I was always trying to like make room for that.
Yeah, I think you're less likely to have a hangover if your alcohol has less congeners in it, which are like the colorants usually that are usually get extracted from whatever the substrate is, whether it's like oak or whatever.
Pat Roger family, how's it going? Now, sleep is essential for your recovery and your performance, which is why we partner with 8 Sleep mattresses. We call them the Tesla of beds. Changes the temperature based off how you sleep. Andrew, how can they get it?
Yeah, head over to 8sleep.com/powerproject, and at checkout, you guys will automatically save $150 off your entire order. Links to them down in the description, as well as the podcast show notes.
I think we also got to always keep in mind, like we mentioned off air, just things that you're interested in, things that you like, things that you enjoy. So, if you can enjoy stuff in moderation and it's not causing you a lot of other problems, then you could always make an argument, well, that's probably really actually fairly healthy.
Yeah.
Like, you smoke weed here and there and it calms you down a bit. Whatever the thing is that you like, sometimes it could be a potential thing that maybe is viewed by others as being dangerous, but maybe you just like it, and maybe it gives you some reprieve, and maybe it's a form of entertainment or whatever it might be. But I think it's important to understand, like, there's just shit that we like to do sometimes.
Yeah, well, I think that it comes back to healthy user bias, that the ability to be moderate, especially with something like alcohol or weed or any other drug, right, has health benefit in and of itself, right? It shows that you are able to moderate your appetite around things that are, generally speaking, pleasurable, right? So think about how that might apply itself to like the consumption of ultra-processed junk foods, right? The ability to be moderate with those things, I think, especially today in the 21st century, gives you an upper hand.
Yeah, what's stronger, to completely avoid them and not purchase them, or to take one scoop and put them back in your freezer?
Yeah, 100%.
It'd be hard, it would be difficult, right?
Yeah. So I mean, and I think when you're drinking alcohol, like there are healthier ways to do it, like to make sure that you're hydrating, that you're keeping your electrolytes up, and things like that. But yeah, I wouldn't say if you don't currently drink, don't. There's no need to start.
A scary thing that, because on the podcast we talk about sleep all the time. It's like we guard our sleep. And one thing that I've noticed I've noticed it in my mom, but other people I know, is like, a lot of people who, let's say, they don't pay attention to health podcasts or this stuff, right? They they'll be on screens, they'll be up a little bit later. Even my mom now, she's 60 something. I try to tell her, hey, go to sleep earlier, but she's watching Nigerian movies until 1 a.m., right? And you got to wonder, as you get older, first off, it's harder to get as much sleep as you used to when you were younger, but the amount of repair that goes on to the brain with quality sleep, and you continue to miss out on that as you get older, it's scary to think about. America's becoming more obese and overweight. There's all these things that are impacting people's sleep. It's a problem, right? So as far as sleep is concerned, how do you have any suggestions for people when it does come to that, especially as you get older, since quality sleep is harder with age?
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, when you sleep, your brain is literally like cleaning itself of the proteins that are associated with Alzheimer's disease, like amyloid beta, tau. We know that on one night of shortened sleep, they can measure levels of amyloid in cerebrospinal fluid. They found that on just one night of shortened sleep, there's a 30% increase in amyloid in cerebrospinal fluid and about a 50% increase in tau, which is not necessarily reflective of what you see in brain. But I mean, the assumption is that the more there is in cerebrospinal fluid, the more likely there will be to clump up and aggregate and form these plaques in the brain, right? So you definitely want to make sure that you're optimizing your sleep. And one of the things that I find super fascinating about sleep is that it tends to be front loaded with the processes that support your immediate survival, right? Like immediately, because like think about like if you were on the run or something, or if like your sleep was disturbed midnight, your body wants to, I think from an evolutionary standpoint, it makes a lot of sense that sleep would be front loaded with the processes that are going to be the most restorative, right? So we know that when you first go to sleep, that's when you get that initial pulse of testosterone, of growth hormone, right? Which is like super reparative to the body. Similarly to the brain, to the anatomy of the brain, that's when you see this swoosh of cerebrospinal fluid go throughout the brain, cleansing itself basically of these proteins like amyloid beta, thanks to the glymphatic system. And that happens earlier on in the night during slow wave sleep, which tends to be front loaded again towards like biased towards the beginning of sleep. It's like later in sleep when like the more emotional regulatory processes take place, like, you know, you get more REM sleep, which is associated with like better emotional regulation and the like. So yeah, I mean, generally just making sure that I think to optimize sleep, one of the things that I think seems to be, the most salient among, you know, whether it's like the reading I've done or the sleep experts that I've talked to, you just want to make sure that you're, you know, being as consistent as you can with your sleep schedule. I think that's a big one, making sure that you're sleeping in a room that's as dark as possible. We're now seeing evidence to suggest that even low-level light exposure at like an intensity of about 5 lux is associated with worse cognitive function the next day. So making sure that your room is as dark as possible. Cooler temperatures, I think, tend to support better sleep. I sleep with one of those like sleep bed cooling systems.
Yeah, we use 8 Sleep.
Yeah, those are bomb. And yeah, diet. I mean, having a healthy dietary pattern, I think, is associated with better sleep. Making sure that another thing that's a really big one is building up sleep pressure over the course of the day. That's like a concept where, you know, when you do things that tire out your body, it puts more pressure on the brain to get to sleep at night. Like if you're sedentary all day, there's going to be a lot less of that. So it's going to make insomnia more likely. And I think there was a study that came out recently, small study, you know, but seemed to suggest that resistance training really more so than aerobic training taxes the nervous system in a way that builds sleep pressure more than aerobic training does.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So resistance train, another reason to resistance train.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, sleep is crucially important.
Yeah, I found that, you know, right before I get to bed, I like almost feel myself getting into bed. I don't know if you guys have any idea what I'm talking about, but it's like almost like a sensor. Like my body just wants to lay down, you know, just like really wants to lay down. And the second that I lay down, I usually fall asleep pretty quickly. I sometimes have a hard time like staying asleep. I'll wake up and fidget and move around and stuff. But
interesting.
Other than that, I sleep pretty good. Especially more recently, I've really improved my sleep quite a bit. The mouth tape has helped a lot. I think getting myself to breathe hard, I think, was something that was necessary for me because I think I had sleep apnea previously because I used to be really fat and bloated. I used to be 330 pounds. So
wow.
A lot of weight loss has helped, but I think there is a side of a little cardiovascular, I think, can go a long way. A little bit of that training can help too.
Yeah, for sure. But sleep apnea, yeah, I'm glad that you've got that under control because that could be a risk factor for you know, cognitive development.
Is there a connection between that and dementia and Alzheimer's or not?
There is. Yeah. I don't want to, you know, because I haven't like looked into the literature in a while, but there is a connection. I mean, you want to make sure that you're allowing your body to get into those deeper modes of sleep,
right?
Deeper phases. And I think the issue with sleep apnea is that it basically precludes like those deeper, you know, levels of sleep
where you're repairing and restoring.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's just like my, you know, from what I remember from, you know, whatever it was 2 years ago that I last looked into that literature. But But yeah, you want to make sure that you're sleeping well.
And what qualifies as a bad night of sleep? Because like we hear it's like, oh, you should strive for 8 hours, but is like 6 hours okay? Is it like 4 hours the drop off? Like where do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's like it's a range. It's generally 7 to 9. I think is like what the American Psychological Association tends to recommend. You need more earlier on in life. People that are like older tend to get by with less sleep. I love having a good 8 or 9 hours. Like I'm a good sleeper. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
This too, because we've talked, and the audience loves meat already. Like if there's anything that this audience eats a lot of, it's red meat. So we know about the benefits of that. But there are some people who are like, meat, yes, veggies, fuck them, right? And Mark sent us a video from you where you talked about spinach. So I'm curious about like if there's any veggies that people should try to add to their diet in the easiest way possible. How should people?
I think he was talking about dark leafy greens, but yes.
Dark leafy greens?
Salads, I think he was mentioning one.
I think, yeah. I mean, the carnivores disagree with me, but I think dark leafy greens are super, super beneficial. First of all, they're one of our most nutrient-dense foods. People love to come at me and say, no, it's all animal products. It's like, yeah, it's mostly animal products. Like animal products tend to be the most nutrient-dense foods. I'm not refuting that. But also you see dark leafy greens up at the top because they're calorie sparse. So they don't have a lot of calories. And that's like, I mean, in the equation of how one determines nutrient density, right? It's like a lot of nutrients for few, nutrients per calorie. Mm-hmm. And dark leafy greens, they're a good source of folate, which is super important. Folate is literally, it's named for foliage, right? That's where you get folate from.
Yeah.
And dark leafy greens are a good source. You get vitamin C, you get various bioactive compounds like carotenoids, which we know are very protective of brain and eye health. You get dietary fiber, which I think is important. Carnivores won't agree with that, but I think dietary fiber at this point, I think we can say with a fair degree of certainty that it seems to be beneficial. Mm-hmm. And yeah, they have a lot going for them. Beal et al., there's a researcher who I like his work a lot. He did a rundown of some of the most nutrient-dense foods. Dark leafy greens were up there next to like organ meats and dairy. Dark leafy greens were like the only plant material that were there. Mm-hmm. So whether it's like arugula, kale, spinach, I wouldn't, if you're at risk for kidney stones, I wouldn't do spinach every day. But kale and arugula I think are great. They also, another thing that dark leafy greens have going for them, they provide nitrate, which gets reduced by oral bacteria to nitrite, which they contain nitrite, which gets reduced to nitrate, which then enters the nitric oxide pathway. Actually, I could have it. Don't quote me on that. But basically, oral bacteria are involved in the reduction of nitrate to nitrite. Yeah, I think that's what it is, which then enters the nitric oxide pathway, which is important for blood pressure regulation. Again, going back to like how important it is to have healthy blood pressure. And researchers out of Rush University found that people who regularly consume dark leafy greens, like a cup and a third a day, have more youthful brains by up to 11 years. Now that's associational.
So like, what did that mean? Like, how did they figure that out?
They do cognitive tests. They do cognitive tests.
These meat eaters are dumb.
But I think it makes sense. First of all, we know that carotenoids, so kale, for example. Kale is one of the top, if not the top sources of lutein and zeaxanthin, which are carotenoids that are directly protective of eye health. They help prevent age-related macular degeneration. Mm-hmm. And we know that these same compounds accumulate in the brain, where they help to protect our brain cell membranes. We know that higher levels of these compounds is associated with slower cognitive decline, reduced risk for dementia, and also better cognitive function in young and healthy people.
Yeah.
So these two compounds are great, and kale is the top source. I think you get like 25 milligrams in a cup of cooked kale, which is like higher than any other dark leafy green. Mm-hmm. And then there was another study that came out in 2016 that found that among fruits and vegetables that were high in flavonoids, so these are a type of polyphenol, it was a randomized control trial. They fed subjects from like the age of 24 all the way up to the age of 70. So like a pretty, robust like smattering of like the age timeline. of lifespans, they found that high flavonoid foods led to an improvement in cognitive function and a boost in BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Yeah.
Low flavonoid, because it was an RCT and they tested like low flavonoid fruits and vegetables, didn't have the same effect, nor did the control diet. And if you look at the top of high flavonoid containing foods, dark leafy greens, kale, and berries, citrus, things like that. But yeah, so I'm a fan of dark leafy greens. I think that they're great. I think just a lot of people don't like eating vegetables. It's like as simple as that.
Would there be a problem? Because like I'm an impatient fuck. So my instinct is like, okay, just take those and just blend them into something with some fruits or whatever. Is there any problem with the breakdown of it?
Zero.
Or it's just, okay.
Yeah, no, blend it up like however you want to get your dark leafy greens in.
Does something like athletic greens help you get there, or is that not the same?
I think probably there's some benefit. Like I don't, something
You're always
like
better off eating it, but
Yes.
if you want to be a little lazy about it, maybe you go that route.
Yeah, you're better off eating your dark leafy greens. But I mean, something like athletic greens is a good multivitamin and multimineral in general, right? But yeah, I see no reason to hate on dark leafy greens. I'm not concerned about the anti-nutrients.
I don't think we ever really hate on them. We just don't really eat them, right?
Yeah.
Like we're just
if they're in front of me, I'll eat it. I'm
Yeah.
just, again, lazy.
Yeah, restaurants, when they serve it, I'll usually eat it. My only contention against vegetables in general is usually like it's like a shuttle. It's a shuttle of other calories usually, just because you got to figure out a way to make them taste good. And so they are almost always accompanied with like ranch dressing or Caesar dressing. And people are probably going to use whatever they're given at the restaurant, and they're probably going to dump 30 grams of crappy oil on there that maybe they don't need.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's a good. We lost our blender bowl.
Don't worry
It's all
about
right. It'll be down there with the other 4 that we probably lost.
Look, it's a good excuse to get a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. Like you don't have to go overboard with the fat, but like I try to do a salad a day because I feel like I'm getting a little bit of extra virgin olive oil, which I think is beneficial. You're getting those flavonoids. You're getting a good hit of dietary fiber. You're getting the because also like something that I wrote about in my first book is that dietary fiber, plant material, polyphenols, like all the things that you get in plants can help broker a better sort of deal is how I would describe it between like when you eat, for example, charred meat. Like I love eating red meat, right? But we know that like when you cook meat using dry heat methods like on a grill, you create compounds that are not necessarily beneficial, right? Like you create what are they called? Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons or, advanced glycation end products. Like these are compounds that in a petri dish could potentially show carcinogenic qualities, right?
And you can also make the argument that just people don't eat that healthy in general. So the exogenous estrogens or whatever the hell those things are called, the other microplastics and things that we eat when you have fiber from vegetables, maybe it helps you excrete and get rid of some of those things.
Helps you get rid of some of those things, helps you with like lipid regulation. Like literally when you eat dietary fiber, it acts like a bile acid sequestrant. So it basically traps bile acids, which is made up of cholesterol. So it helps increase the efficiency of your liver at recycling lipoproteins, like the ApoB and LDL lipoproteins that, we love to talk about with regard to cardiovascular health. When you consume dietary fiber, it traps cholesterol in the gut and it causes your liver to surface more LDL receptors, which essentially make your liver better at recycling lipoproteins, which you generally want. You want that to happen, right? So yeah, I'm a fan of fiber. I think it helps to, from a mechanistic standpoint, like we have good reason to assume that it's going to help regulate things like inflammation in the body. Fiber is also satiating. So I've always had this feeling that carnivores just like they never liked vegetables. They grew up not, in households where vegetables weren't really prepared very well. And the like, but so maybe my bias is that I enjoy eating vegetables. Like there's, I'll put that out there, but I think that there is good evidence to say that like vegetables are beneficial.
But they're trying to kill us.
Just
Slowly, not till we're 98.
Well, that's the thing. Those
they're playing the long game.
They're playing the long game. Yeah, they're not very good at like because it comes back to hormesis. Like those flavonoids are polyphenols. Polyphenols are plant defense compounds. So I posed this question on Instagram actually today to the carnivores, like, if flavonoids are polyphenols and polyphenols are plant defense compounds, and it's the high polyphenol intervention that seem to improve cognitive function and boost levels of BDNF, how are they trying to kill us if they're actually improving the way that our brains work? So I think part of it has to do with, I think there's two potential mechanisms here. One is that it's hormesis, right? Which is like when low doses of a toxin or a stress actually elicits a protective and beneficial response in us. Or there's the alternative hypothesis that they actually act like prebiotics. So we know that prebiotics like fiber, like resistant starch, are beneficial to gut bacteria, but polyphenols are also prebiotic. And so, sometimes these bacteria, they consume these compounds, whether, they're flavanols or flavonoids, and then they push out these like metabolites like that we then absorb. Because in general, polyphenols are pretty poorly absorbed. But nonetheless, the consumption of polyphenols is associated with dramatically better health. Now, you could say healthy user bias, of course, like that's always going to be there, right? But one of the sort of like alternate hypotheses is that they have a prebiotic effect, and that what they yield in terms of their postbiotic metabolites that are produced by gut bacteria, those are actually, better absorbed or fully absorbed, right? And that we benefit from those. And that just goes back to the symbiotic nature of like us and the bacteria that inhabit us.
It's a great way to kind of fill yourself up without a lot of extra calories. If you're not dumping a bunch of weird oils on there.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. But what's interesting is when you consume fiber, you tend to absorb it as fat because you ingest fiber and then the bacteria churn out short chain fatty acids like butyrate. So it's kind of cool, that like a salad that has no fat in it could actually end up yielding like a fat source.
All right, well, you sold me. I'm gonna make an effort. We'll see if I get anywhere, but I'll make an effort. I'll try to eat more vegetables.
I was gonna blend that shit in with some fruits.
And if I don't get more jacked, I know who to get.
Next time I come here, you're gonna see like throwing spinach into the coffee concoction. I don't know how good that would be.
That can be all right.
It'll be weird.
Yeah, in my mind, when I think of like vegetables in general, my mind just goes to broccoli for some reason. But like sometimes some of that stuff will just like make me super gassy. So with like the dark leafy stuff, how is that for people's like,
how's that for hormesis?
Yeah.
Yeah, but is it like typically like pretty like easy on digestion and stuff?
It depends. I think it depends on the green, to be honest. And also, I think it's important for people to note that if certain things don't agree with you, it might not necessarily be the fault of the thing. Like, it might not necessarily be, for example, like fiber that's the problem. It might be that like we live in a time where many people suffer from gut dysbiosis, right? Like they suffer from like an impaired gut microbiome, for lack of a better term, or reduced gut resilience, which could be attributed to many possible things, whether it's like, things early in life that
might need like really tiny exposures to it to help get you past it over time or something like that.
Yeah. I think many of us have lost like gut resilience, and we have like increasing rates of autoimmunity and allergies. And I think that there's probably many things that you could point to, many aspects of like modern life that you could point a finger at, whether it's like C-section overuse, or, not many of us have the privilege and luxury of being breastfed, when we're babies, or we're overprescribed antibiotics these days, or there's like this sterility that we're born into now that didn't exist for the vast majority of our evolution, and early in life when our microbiomes are at their most plastic, which there is this, we talk about brain plasticity. Our microbiomes have this quality of plasticity as well, which is, I think, most the case when we're younger. And our microbiomes really serve to train our immune systems. And because our modern lifestyles have become so aberrant compared to our, how we came into this world historically, I think it's led to this like loss of gut resilience. And then throw into the mix all the industrial additives that we're consuming, the whether it's like emulsifiers or the whatever it is, like industrial byproducts, industrial, various like toxicants. I mean, there's like too many to list. The overexposure to gluten, which is something that, we've only had for the past like blip on the radar in terms of human evolution. And now it's like, it's literally everywhere at every meal. So I think that there's like just this loss of resilience. So that's why some people suffer from like, fiber or various plant compounds. But I don't think it's those compounds themselves. It's like the context in which they're being consumed.
That's why I don't wash my cup. You guys see? Like I just rinse it out. I don't use soap because I'm I'm serious.
Building strength.
Like having a dog is one of the best biohacks there is,
Oh,
for this reason.
3. Yeah,
3. A dog. I mean, I have a cat, so I mean, like I'm keeping my fingers crossed that like it's similar, but my cat doesn't get to go out of the house. But your dogs are out of there. They're sniffing. They're eating all kinds of fucking things, and they get in your face, right?
Yeah.
So that to me is like one of the. I mean, the research supports this. That it's like one of the best biohacks there is, right? Because
a kid will really test your immune system.
Yeah, seriously.
Having kids, brutal. I think on to what you're saying, I actually kind of have a little bit of a theory. I think that when people get disconnected from movement from when they're younger, like a lot of young kids will move around a lot until they're like 9-10 years old, and you kind of just stop like effing around as much. You don't move around as much. And then a lot of people also might play sports, and so till they're 19-20 or so, they're still connected to some sort of athleticism. But then from that point on, a lot of people don't move for a long time. Somebody that might just start jogging or go cycling, they're like, wow, I haven't really even been on a bike in like 20 years. I haven't gone for a run in 20 years. And some of just what I've seen is like, I think that some dysfunctional digestion has a lot to do with dysfunctional movement. And I think same thing with the brain. I think if you challenge yourself and you move a lot and you start moving in a lot of different, you have a lot of different disciplines. I think that you can kind of fill in a lot of the blanks in the mind. And I think the digestive system can get kind of, I don't know, just like, I just seen it time and time again where people are like, I didn't used to be allergic to this. I didn't used to be allergic to that. I didn't used to have an issue with this. I didn't used to have an issue with that. And it's like, well, you don't really move around that much either. So maybe those two things are connected.
I think they're definitely connected. Yeah. I mean, they've shown that just exercise by itself can shift the gut microbiota composition, which is very counterintuitive, right?
It's really interesting, right?
Yeah, it's super, super interesting. So yeah, I definitely think that theory holds water. I mean, just throw that into the mix, right? On top of everything else, like overexposure to industrial toxicants, overexposure to ultra processed foods, lack of, I mean, there's even like circadian aspect to our,
100%.
to our microbiota, right? Like the fact that like, there's like this, like, we are governed in many ways by circadian rhythmicity. Like so too is our gut microbiota. And today we're eating 16 hours a day, around the clock. We're digesting and metabolizing food, which has thrown off the clocks of like, of our clocks as well as the clocks of the bacteria that live within us. So I think there's a lot of potential issues here, but still, I think it's important for people to not major in the minors and the low hanging fruit, as you talked about, like making sure like to not become too obsessed and to just do what one can and within one's means to, just shifting their diet to incrementally better quality and getting in more movement and making sure to resistance train regularly, looking to their sleep, stress, all that stuff. It can be overwhelming, but yeah, I think they all have a big impact.
Do you count calories? Do you bother? I mean, imagining if you're on the quality side of food, you probably don't care too much.
I don't count calories. It's funny. The thing that I count, I try to hit my like protein goal every day. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing I count. Do you guys do the same thing? Is it?
We don't really count, but like that's what we pay attention to.
That's what I pay attention to. Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, I used to count, but I haven't counted since about like 5 years just because food quality is better.
Same.
And for me personally, fasting was pretty beneficial in helping me learn how to control my voracious amount of hunger. Just because in the past, if I was hungry, I'd have to eat or I'd be a little annoyed.
Yeah.
But nowadays, like I have control over that. I was actually going to ask you about that when you mentioned how people are eating consistently throughout the day. Because within our space, when people talk about fasting, some people love and hate it. They're the coaches who are like, oh, fasting's this fad thing. It doesn't matter. Calories in, calories out. But then you see how in application, it helps people learn how to control hunger over time. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on picking up that habit if you think it's beneficial, along with counting calories and all of that.
Yeah, obviously calories are important. Obviously, if people lose weight when they're fasting, it's because they were able to put themselves in a calorie deficit. Like, I'm not refuting any of that. But I do think it's a worthwhile tool for I think hunger regulation. There was just a study that came out that found that people that ate an earlier dinner, so early time restricted feeding, they were less hungry the next day compared to people who ate dinner at 9 p.m. So people that ate dinner at 6 p.m. were less hungry the next day compared to people that ate their dinner late, like at 9 p.m. And they consumed fewer calories the next day, about not a ton, but like 60%.
Yeah.
Less, sorry, not 60%, 60 calories, 60 fewer calories, less the next day. So that right there is a mechanism, right, by which like an earlier dinner, early time restricted feeding could help promote weight loss. It still comes back obviously to CECO, right, to energy balance, but like any tool that is going to be helpful for people, I think is worth like, it's worth being able to like have that in your back pocket so that you can pick and choose and, you know, figure out what's going to work best for you. Outside of weight, from like a cardiometabolic health standpoint, I think that there is good evidence that eating earlier dinners, so like again, early time restricted feeding, can help with blood sugar regulation and blood pressure and things like that. So it does seem to be healthier, right? Like, so again, I think it's a tool. Is it gonna is when you eat suddenly more important than what you eat? No, it's not. But it, you know, insofar as it can be like a useful tool for some people swear by it and some people hate it. But the fact that people are out there swearing by it, then why should we bash it? Right? Like I hate that. I hate like on social media when you see these like fitness coaches or personal trainers or whatever, like shitting on, you know, just across the board, like these different trends. Like it's cool to like talk about a trend and be like, you know, discuss the nuances and the ups and downs. But like these people who create brands, you know, like personal brands, all about just like shitting on others or different trends. Oh, it's nauseating to me. It's, first of all, it's so lazy. It's like creatively and intellectually so lazy, but you know, I guess whatever gets the clicks.
It's a lot of just calling out of work that somebody else is.
Dude, it's the worst. Yeah, it's the worst. But
and it's also hard too, because like sometimes they'll just take a clip of what you said.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that was like 1 minute of me talking that someone turned into a reel. And then it's like I don't really believe that necessarily. I believe a lot of other stuff too.
Yeah. I mean, you'll never see me. I don't call out people. Yeah, I can't remember the last time I did that, because I think it's like I'm there to help people. Like I'm there to to light a candle and pave a path for people. Like, you know, and I think everybody should with valuable ideas should have a seat at the table and to be able to like converse, you know, like, because again, like I learn from the evidence-based people, but I also learn from the carnivores. I learn from, you know, even the vegans I've learned from. So to me,
but not really.
We love you.
I think you know, when you people tend to think like someone like Paul Saladino, they think someone like that is like literally trying to, like, he's got some other agenda. And yes, he sells products. I sell products. Lane Norton sells products. Like, people sell stuff, you know, but we don't have like, there's not like an evil master plan, you know, that somebody has been devising. And I think that's important to understand. It's like most of the people, no matter what they're putting forward, even if they're putting forward to be a fruitarian, they're trying just to put forward the best information they got, and they have found utility in that, and they're excited about it.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you think doctors are not trying to sell something? You think like the pharmaceutical industry is not? So everybody's trying to sell something, right?
Even
like,
if it's just the idea.
Even if it's just the idea, yeah. I mean, you see, like in the industry that is science. I mean, people are trying to sell. PhDs are out there trying to sell their reputations, right? They're trying to sell their, and we've seen how poisonous this can be when it gets in the way of good science, right? Like we saw recently in the world of Alzheimer's disease with the whole like amyloid hypothesis, and the, you know, the fake data that was like published, I believe it was 2006, that came out and really renewed fervor for the amyloid hypothesis, despite the fact that 99.6% of Alzheimer's drug trials that have gone down that path have been abject failures. So
the data was fake, actually? I didn't hear you say that before.
Yeah, there was, oh my God, because I didn't review it before coming on here, so I wasn't like super prepped to talk about it. But yeah, it was like basically published in Nature. It was 2000, 2006, this researcher at University of Minnesota, Sylvain Lesny, basically published a paper that, at the time, interest in pursuing the amyloid hypothesis was waning because drug trials were just failing left and right, and it just didn't seem to be the answer. A paper came out that really renewed fervor with regard to that hypothesis. So this researcher published data suggesting that he found the holy grail, the missing link that connected amyloid plaque to cognitive dysfunction. Because as I mentioned, people that have amyloid in their brains don't necessarily also present with the cognitive dysfunction, right? So where is that break in the chain, right? If amyloid is the causal player here in Alzheimer's disease. And so he published a paper where he claimed to have found this amyloid subtype that, when injected into a young and healthy mouse, caused profound cognitive dysfunction. And that was back in 2006. And so that, because of that, basically the funding pipeline increased. The millions and millions of dollars turned into billions of dollars of drug discovery for this thing. But it turns out, and this was revealed in a article published in Science a couple months ago, that basically that the data was completely fraudulent, that there was evidence that it was just like a copy and paste job.
That was actually just like in July.
And this is science, bro. This is like uppercase S science, So all that is to say is that, show me one person that is not ultimately driven by self-interest, right?
Right.
That's there, but you got to find the helpers, to quote Mr. Rogers. May he rest in peace. Find the helpers.
Well, and interestingly enough, I think a lot of the information that's on even just Instagram is like things that are that can be helpful with big time diseases like dementia. And from people that aren't doctors, people like yourself, people that have just been researching it, people that have been, again, I point to like someone like Paul Saladino, who can be inflammatory, but you got to be able to kind of read between the lines. Is he trying to be helpful? Does he have information that's helpful? Maybe something he says triggers you. Maybe something Dr. Baker says triggers you. However, do these people have things that you can take, you can apply to your life, you can mention to a family member that may help them with their weight problem, maybe their potential disease? It's rare to see doctors talking this way. We do have Dr. Lyon, and there's some out there, but you just don't really see. Doctors are busy seeing patients and doing other things. You don't really see them, even though Paul is a doctor. He's not a nutritionist and not like a normal healthcare provider, or whatever the hell that would be called. But you kind of see my point. Is there's a lot of great information out there, and it just sometimes can be hard to, I guess, sift through. I think Joe Rogan's platform is amazing, and that's what I really admired when you were on there. I think you were one of the better guests. I've listened to every nutrition guest he's ever had, and
wow.
I really loved all the interviews. They've been really amazing to listen to the different sides of people. He's even had debates on there and stuff, and I found them to be really fascinating. But you really stood out to me, and the reason why you stood out was because you were just right down the middle the whole time, and that is a hard place to try to live, and it's really difficult on Instagram and on TikTok and social media. Because I think that the middle is kind of boring. It's like the long game. We talk about it all the time. Okay, well, here's your introduction to what you're going to do lifting wise. And here's kind of a diet breakdown. And, come back in maybe 10, 15 years and you'll have some probably pretty good results. And people are like, what? That's so long. So I really appreciate the information you were sharing on Rogan. I thought it was amazing.
Dude, that means a hell of a lot coming from you. So thank you. Thank you for that. I think that's also why the vegans tend to dislike me as much as they do, because I'm the biggest threat, because I'm actually the most accurate. I strive to be at least the most. And, that's not to say that I've never made a mistake. But
the answer's in the middle, and that's kind of where you're hanging out.
Yeah, that's 100%. And I do have a perspective on things that that I try to leave room for debate. But yeah, because every message that I put out, I try to think about the person at the other end. What if the person at the other end is somebody like my mom? That's the filter that I put all of my messaging, all of the recommendations that I make through. And I think some of these more hardline, dogmatic personalities, some of whom you've mentioned in the space. I don't think that level of dogma and that kind of black and white thinking is really that helpful, because you got to meet people where they're at. And yeah, I mean, like, for example, like the vegetable thing, like I just don't think that like vegetables are the cause of all of our problems, like I just don't.
It's kind of a weird fight.
It's a weird fight. Yeah. It's like that. If that's the hill you're going to die on, like, I think refined grains are a big problem. I personally think that seed oils are a problem. Are they the number one problem? Are they the smoking gun? I wouldn't go that far. But I do think that they're, like with these kinds of novel foods, the thing is, I just don't want to like, if like these huge, multinational food conglomerates, right? Like if they're the ones, if there's like an ad on TV for a product, like chances are you're better off avoiding that product is what I think. You're not seeing ads on TV for avocados. You're not seeing ads on TV for broccoli. You're not seeing ads on TV for extra virgin olive oil, right? But you are for corn oil. You are for, the Mazzolas of the world, right? Yeah. And so what happens like when you base your diet around that, when there's so much vested interest, there's so many conflicts of interest in science, like in the food industry, right? Like there was just a paper that came out, the 2020 Dietary Guidelines for Americans Committee, 95% of people in that committee had conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest with the food industry, with pharma, right? Like Kellogg's, Nestle, AstraZeneca, right? Those are the people that are telling us how to eat. I just don't like, stay out of my kitchen, Keep your grips like away from my family. Cause like you get sick at the end of the day and where's your recourse, right? Like what if it was these like novel foods that didn't exist prior to 50 years ago? Like what are you going to do about it? You can't prove it. That's why like some of these like more evidence-based people, like maybe there is all this like data out there on like glyphosate being perfectly safe and healthy to consume, like in volume amounts, right? You can show me all the data you want. I don't want it in my body. I know it is in my body. It's in, what was the stat that just came out? It's in like 85% of our bodies.
Something crazy like that.
Something crazy like that recently just came out.
Sorry, what was it? I was looking at the committee.
Glyphosates.
Yeah. It's like, it just came out. Something like 80% or 90% of people have glyphosate in their urine, adults.
Oh.
Yeah.
Where does that stem from? Because I've been hearing a lot about glyphosates recently. Everyone's been talking about it. Like where does that stem from?
The thing is, I don't even feel like I need to hear health claims for it. I just would rather not have it like in me, and I know that it already is, but it's just like, it's an herbicide. It's a desiccant used to dry like grains and things like that. It's primarily found in like grain products.
Okay.
And also I believe
We're
used,
good.
yeah. Also I believe used in the growing of like soybeans and corn and things like that.
Okay.
And some of these things you can even just like we talk about like barefoot running and barefoot walking and like you can just get it just from walking through a field or just if the neighbor next door uses it or there's a lot of different ways to get it more so than just eating things that have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it said more than 80% of urine samples from U.S. kids and adults. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Well, we know there's problems, we know there's problems. And like, is that the main problem? Is the seed oil the main problem? No, probably the main problem is, people have their phones in their room. They're not sleeping properly. They wake up later than normal. Their idea of breakfast is to eat cereal. Their lunch is Subway.
And
their
a Costco
dinner,
muffin.
Yeah, and the Costco muffin, which people still think muffins are fine, but a muffin is basically cake or a donut. And then they finish their day off with like some pizza or something like that, and it's like there's just not like that's just not a diet that's going to be really be helpful for any human being to be able to sustain a good, healthy, strong life.
Yeah, exactly. And I live in LA. I have access to great supermarkets, so I'm definitely coming at this from like a place of like I'm pretty lucky, but in general, I think like that's the power of information. Is like you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Like the genie doesn't go back in the bottle. Once that information is out there, and people start like questioning. The problem is, I think most people just don't question. Like they just kind of like they go about their day, and because the brain loves to like to identify patterns. We're pattern seeking machines. And then it just becomes less of a cognitive burden to just keep doing the same thing every day, day in and day out, whether it's like the same route to work, whether it's like, putting the same things in our shopping cart. But I think if people were like to just stop and kind of like be more mindful and to question their purchases and their decisions and their attitudes about certain things and even their preferences, like their own preferences. That's something that I think is like really important, to always like be willing to like reassess the things that you think that you like, because I like things today that I didn't like, 20 years ago. But a lot of people, they kind of just like take they take their preferences or whatever it is to the grave. And to me, that's just like it's not the way to live,
It's hard to do that with beliefs, but it's important.
Yeah. What is that saying that you see sometimes like in like elementary schools or in libraries, like a mind functions like a parachute. It's best used when open or something like that.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Something like that.
I like that.
Yeah.
This makes me kind of curious because it kind of flows back into what we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, where you just usually avoid artificial sweeteners, primarily like sucralose. But out of that, because I'm not trying to have you get in a fight with Lane or anybody like that, but what is typically popular within the health space that people deem pretty healthy that you're just like, it might be all right, but I just choose to avoid it?
Yeah.
Artificial sweeteners seems to be one of those things, right?
Yeah, but again, like I think it's like a values thing. It's not even necessarily like
thing.
a data driven thing. Like I had Lane on my podcast recently, and I'm totally aware of his like stance on artificial sweeteners, and I'm and I asked him about them, and I was like, full disclosure, I don't consume them, but what does the data say? And he shared what he typically shares on that topic. But yeah, I mean, I personally like sweeteners. I'll use like stevia, monk fruit, like the occasional sugar, alcohol, things like that. And that's not. I'm not saying that artificial sweeteners are bad or anything. They're not inert though. I think there was a study that even he shared that just came out that showed that compared to stevia, it was like sucralose, and I think there was one other that did show like a glycemic effect. I don't remember the specifics. And it does shift the microbiota. I mean, everything you eat shifts the microbiota. So I'm not, but like they're not inert is the thing. And a lot of these like food products that didn't exist, like 60 years ago, we're still living in that experiment. Is like what I think it's like important to be mindful of. Yeah. And so I take what's called like the precautionary principle approach. It's like an actual. It's like an actual philosophy where like if you don't, not having all the data, first of all, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So just because you don't yet have proof of something, like err on the side of, I think, caution. And like with some of these like newfangled products, like I think the approach should be guilty until proven innocent, as opposed to innocent until proven guilty. There's also a lot of instances where, like products are foisted onto the market, only later having to be recalled or worse, like having wrought serious health like consequences onto people. At which point it's already too late. Whether it's like asbestos in talc, like I don't know if you saw that documentary, but like people with like it was Johnson & Johnson. This is like public knowledge. Like there was like I believe it was asbestos in the talc that women were starting to develop like rare vaginal cancers. After like growing up using this stuff, we were putting like lead in our gasoline, lead in our paint. Like there's just partially hydrogenated fats that were on the market up until 10 years ago. There's all these like examples.
Fat-free cheese.
Hey,
benzene in sunscreen, were recently recalled. There was something that just came out where like these chemical hair straighteners that women use associated with different cancers. I have a friend who'd been using these kinds of straighteners for more than a decade, and she's a young, healthy girl, right? She's in good shape. Just had like thyroid cancer.
I've heard you talk about mouthwash too.
Mouthwash.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Strip away your gains.
You don't want to strip away your gains.
That's some bullshit.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
No wonder.
Because the thing is mouthwash and like more research needs to be done. So I'm not saying conclusively that this is the case, but we have scientific plausibility to say that antiseptic mouthwash, because it kills indiscriminately oral bacteria, which are involved in that pathway, that nitric oxide pathway, that it can potentially have an effect on your blood pressure, among other other things.
Yeah.
And so they've done studies where they found that regular users, people who use antiseptic mouthwash 2 or more times a day. This was an obese cohort, right? So they didn't have baseline, like they weren't like the healthiest population, but nonetheless, 2 or more times a day, had a 50% increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes and a doubling of risk for the development of hypertension as a result of, or not necessarily as a result, but correlated to regularly using antiseptic mouthwash, which by the way is like 40% of people. 40% of people use mouthwash on a daily basis. And then you combine that with insights gleaned from like other types of studies, right? Like there was a randomized controlled trial that found that when people used antiseptic mouthwash, I believe it was chlorhexidine, in the post-workout setting. We know that exercise is one of the best ways to get healthier blood pressure. There's an antihypertensive effect of exercise. That's a really important benefit of exercise, that they negated the effect, that effect of exercise when they used antiseptic mouthwash post-workout. Because you're creating nitric oxide when you exercise, and the oral bacteria are involved in the recycling of nitric oxide. And so immediately after a workout, if you go and swish with antiseptic mouthwash, killing those bacteria, that's like, it's obviously it's having an effect, right? So not everybody's using chlorhexidine, which is like a medical, mouthwash, but it's also, it's antiseptic.
Yeah.
Right? People are regularly using these mouthwashes that boast, we kill 99.9% of bacteria in your mouth. Like,
what's the name of that mouthwash that dentist came on?
Lumineux.
Yeah, I use that.
Lumineux?
It's spelled with like 15 X's though, so I don't know how to pronounce it.
Lumiere.
We had this dentist a few years ago who he has this mouthwash and this other stuff.
Toothpaste and stuff, yeah.
But he talked about how like typical mouthwash destroys the good bacteria in your mouth that helps you actually be healthier.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's not a, why should you sterilize your mouth?
Right.
Like there's no part of you that's sterile, right? Like,
Especially us.
Yeah. Right? Like your mouth is an ecosystem. And so I think there's a reason why there's like fluoride in the water, right? It's because we fucking eat shit, right? And that's why there's like this epidemic of dental caries, periodontal disease. And so fluoride helps, right? But if you actually eat like a biologically appropriate diet, you don't need any of that stuff. Like you can floss, you can like brush your teeth and scrape the plaque off and stuff. But all these like extra steps, it's like you're just sold it. You're sold myths on a regular basis about diet, about the way a human is supposed to smell, about the way that a human is, like all these different things. And
is there a toothpaste you use? Specific toothpaste or mouthwash?
I use a toothpaste that has, I've used different brands over time, but generally I look for toothpaste that have a compound in it called hydroxyapatite, which is
okay.
Yeah, it's supposed to be as good at remineralizing teeth as fluoride, but it doesn't. Fluoride has endocrine disrupting potential. So generally, and it also disrupts the oral microbiome. So I try to avoid fluoride. I'm not saying everybody needs to go and avoid fluoride, but for me, this is I try to eat a low grain diet. Grains are the worst when it comes to dental health, because any food generally that's easily retained by oral bacteria. Like you'd think that sugar sweetened beverages are the worst for dental health. They're actually not that bad for dental health because liquid doesn't easily get retained.
You need something more like a Butterfinger, like it's stuck to your teeth.
Yes, that's like a 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
Because it's the sugar, right?
And it just sits there.
It just sits there. And so like 12-year-old Max was eating grains for every meal and had a major sweet tooth. And when I every time I would go to the dentist, I would have a new cavity. So I grew up with tons and tons and tons of cavities. But after I made the switch to I demoted grains, I rarely ever, I don't ever get cavities anymore. So yeah, it's, but we're sold it's everybody's, it almost feel, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but at times
let's go.
One might be inclined to feel like everybody's colluding, to just keep us hooked into the system, and I just
well, No, he's pointing at me because I will go down all those rabbit holes and like I told you guys, and then nobody like pays attention or anything. But
yeah, but you have to see. I mean, you have to try to see it like from my vantage point. Like my mom tried to be healthy her whole life, and I saw like profound sickness and ultimately death, and a medical system that wasn't at any turn able to help her in any meaningful way. Mm-hmm. And we were, you look up like white privilege in the dictionary, like you see my picture, right? I grew up in like New York City, like, my parents, like, we weren't poor, like we had,
Manhattan.
Yeah, I grew up in Manhattan. We had access, like, and nonetheless, it was just bad. So, I mean, like with all that, like I see how difficult it is for people. And so I just like, my heart goes out to people struggling with like the misinformation and the health issues. It's just like, it's really bad.
Something like dementia is really awful to go through from my understanding, because did your mom like kind of forget who you were type stuff? Like, did you have to go through that kind of stuff? Or
she didn't forget who I was ever, but it was like just her overall cognitive function, just like, downshifted severely and wasn't able to upshift, like, at that point. She, like she would like she would like have a thought and then try to like, express an idea. And soon after initiating would like forget her train of thought or go off and say something like nonsensical. And it was really hard. I mean, because I've been working on this documentary for 8 years, I have footage like of myself in real time with my mom going through this. And, that's the trailer. Yeah. My reaction to my mom, sometimes I cringe, because it was just so hard. I was in denial of like what it was that we were all going through. And
would you sometimes get frustrated with it?
I would get frustrated. Yeah. I would think that she was just like fucking with us, like my brothers.
Shit, I think I would do probably the same.
Yeah.
Be like, hey, I'm trying to help you, and what are you doing? I wouldn't understand right away.
Yeah. There's also for people that are around those with dementia, there's this, I think, instinct to try to coax out correct behavior or correct like reasoning from somebody with dementia, when actually what you I learned, after the fact, unfortunately, but you want to practice what's called compassionate communication. And there's like this idea of like, it's called therapeutic fibbing, which is basically like, for somebody with dementia, it's so hard, and, they already likely feel shame about what it is that they have to some degree. And so the best way to approach, I think, compassionately is to just kind of like, to not try to correct them, to just go along.
Maybe almost like you would with a little kid.
Yeah. Yeah, you wouldn't like try to correct a little kid. Little kids say things that little kids say.
You'd maybe say, "Oh, we're not doing that for right now," but maybe you try to change the subject.
You try to change it, or yeah. Well, because also like you take this stance that like you're educating the little kid, which I think is like makes sense when you're talking to a little kid. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
to do with somebody with dementia.
And honestly, like I have a sibling with schizophrenia, and it's the same. It's different, but the compassionate, I guess, what do you call it?
Compassionate communication, yeah.
That's necessary, because like they'll have a certain belief, and you can't say, no, that's wrong. Like you have to, earlier when it happened, my thing was just like trying to tell that sibling, no, that's not right. But you can't tell someone who has things that voices are telling them things, you can't just correct them.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, if you have somebody with mental illness, that is something you got to understand.
Yeah, 100%. It's major. Yeah. And I learned that too late. And my mom, always knew that I loved her, and it's like everybody did the best in my family, did the best they could given the circumstances and the information that we had. But yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult. So it's just like motivated me to help. If one person listening to me out there prevents their own dementia, then I'll feel like I've done, my job.
You watch any movies or TV or anything like that? You get an opportunity to do that here and there?
Yeah, dude, I'm a big cinemaphile. I'm a big music fanatic, and I'm a big movie and like TV fanatic.
So it's 8:00 at night and you get to just chill on the couch and you get to watch something, what do you eat?
What do I eat on the couch?
Yeah.
I thought you were going to ask what I'm
Curveball.
watching. Yeah. Oh, man.
Yeah, we want to know what you're watching too, but yeah, like will you like indulge in just like eating, a little bit of like whatever here and there, or will it mainly be, you're sitting down with some fucking Greek yogurt or something?
Yeah.
Dark chocolate.
No, honestly, like the Greek yogurt lately has been really great. Like I've been mixing that with some whey protein, and yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Throw some berries in there, some cacao, bee pollen, hemp seeds.
I do the same thing. Gives you something to do while you're watching something.
Yeah,
You're
dude, I love it.
You're not pigging out on something that's gonna.
I try
make you
not
feel
to.
like shit.
Yeah, I try not to eat anything around the couch because you know that whatever you're eating around, like, it's not good.
Right. Right.
It's like some combination of carbs and fat. Like it's not the. Like me and my brothers and my friend now, we have like this thing that we say to each other. I think it helps motivate them, but it's like, when my brother's reaching at the supermarket and I see him reaching for like the ice cream or whatever, I'm like, is that going to help you get ripped? Is that going to help you get ripped?
Right.
We have a sense of humor in my family. I'm not like shaming him or anything, but like but yeah, it's like most of the things that you end up eating. That's I think one of the unspoken mechanisms by which intermittent fasting works potentially, is that like it cuts off those hours of the day where that you're just eating shit. Like nobody's sitting around, binge watching their latest greatest Netflix, obsession while eating strips of chicken breast. Like who's doing that? Nobody. Right. So by cutting off, say your feeding window to whatever it is, whatever time of day it is you eat dinner, or soon after that, you're cutting off those expendable calories that are for the most part, going to be like carbs.
Yeah, and it's just less choices in the day.
Yeah.
Kinda nice.
Yeah.
What are you watching?
Man, well, the latest thing that I saw, it's gonna make me sound kind of dark, but I think it's one of the best things I've ever seen. Period. Was Dahmer.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna say it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Have you seen it?
Yes.
Dude.
Yes.
Incredible.
Fucking good.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Incredible.
You guys have
dark,
seen it
bro.
too, right?
No, I have not seen it.
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Oh,
Dude,
dude,
it's
you
great.
have to watch
I was
it.
watching that bodybuilding thing last night. That
Killer
body
Sally?
Start that.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, that was a good documentary.
It's been pretty good so far.
What is it? I gotta watch your documentary. Your
Yeah,
brother's doc.
Oh, you haven't a chance to see it
I
yet?
haven't seen it, no.
I think you'll dig it.
Yeah, I want to.
Yeah.
I'm pumped for that.
No, Dahmer's very dark. Killer Sally, y'all should watch it. It's the first episode. Well, it's pretty much
That
about
guy's
this.
jacked, man. He looked great.
Yeah, placed top like 14 in the Olympia or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's this pretty much this woman killed her bodybuilder boyfriend, but she was also a bodybuilder. So it's if you're in fitness or if you're into that type of thing, the first episode you're like, whoa, this
Watch out.
It's
We
cool.
have-
They're way into bodybuilding.
meatheads
Yeah.
to the
Yeah,
to
all
the
the
max.
way, yeah.
Yeah.
Damn.
Interesting environment for their children to grow up in, to see them like just obsess over like the food and the whole thing.
What's
yeah,
it called?
it's pretty
What's it
cool.
called?
It's called Killer Sally, right?
Killer Sally. I haven't even heard of it. Yeah, I'll check it out.
Yeah, and the woman, she's dynamic. So like it just kind of just all goes around her, and like she just does a great job of describing, what the relationship was like and everything like that.
Wow. Cool. Yeah, I'll check it out.
Dahmer, huh? I got to check that one out. What else you got?
What else? I feel like
Or what did you really like about it, actually?
Dahmer? Well, he's obviously like a very complicated character. Like he obviously did monstrous, horrible things, right? But the incredible thing about that show is that it still elicits like an empathetic, feeling towards him, and everything that he went through. Like, it makes you kind of see the conditions that might have in the right or wrong person, create this monster. Essentially,
He's very sick, obviously, right? I mean,
yeah, he's sick, and he had like this upbringing where nobody paid attention to him, and
he questioned why he was that way.
Yeah. It doesn't excuse him. Like he's not excused from what he did. He deserved everything that he got. That came to him. But it makes you feel like it makes you feel like there's like a difference. What is that?
I love the meme template. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, it just makes you like it's sort of like I've used the analogy like if a pit bull who's been abused his whole life bites somebody, obviously you put the pit bull down because it's unownable as a pet, right? But is it the pit bull's fault? Was the pit bull a monster? Or was it the conditions that created him? You know what I'm saying? Like, to me, it seemed like he was always, at least in his portrayal in this show, that he was always aware that what he was doing was wrong, and that he, you know, had a degree of empathy for his victims. Like, he didn't want to see them in pain. You know, he would always like drug them and shit. So again, I'm not excusing him, but he's just like, it's a fascinating character study. And I think like from the production to the acting, just like everything was like 5 stars. Just everything was incredible. Everything about it, from the music to Evan Peters' performance, it was just like really like a tour de force.
It's thought provoking, right? Like what do you do with people that end up in those situations? You know, how do we treat them? How do we? Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of good answers to any of it, but you know, there's people that there's just so many different kinds of people out there, and people can be shaped in so many different ways. It makes it very hard to determine like what do we do with this person when we're faced with this? Just like in the case with something like a school shooter.
Yeah,
you know, there's really nothing you can do about it. It's after the fact. How do we try to prevent this moving forward? Like and you're just like, I don't know. Like, is it society that's pumping this out, or?
Yeah, definitely. Like,
it's not one thing. It's a lot.
It's systemic.
It's hard to figure out.
Yeah, and there's like, you know, and it's explored in Dahmer, but like there were the failings of society at the time also allowed for this pustule to ferment. You know, like it allowed for that. Like whether it was like the cops and how, you know, creeped out they were by like gay culture at the time, which, you know, that wouldn't happen today necessarily, but at least not in like most, I think, parts of the country. But like at the time, you know, like they had to go by like pseudonyms, like even when they would go out at like nightclubs. So there was like this like, you know, the law enforcement kept that whole culture at like arm's length. So there was that. And then there was like the fact that like, you know, a lot of his victims came from like families that were like pretty hands off. You know, they weren't like, these people didn't really have like the support systems in their life where they would go missing and then there would be like a response, you know, like if I went missing, there would be a freaking response, you know, from my family, I would assume, you know, but it's just, yeah. So there were all these like different like aspects. But yeah, I don't know. It was just really, really well done. Like I thought the acting was incredible. The music.
What's one of your favorite movies?
Oh man, there's so many. I love like, what comes to mind, I love the Wachowskis. So like V for Vendetta is one of my favorite movies. I love Cloud Atlas, even though people tend to not get that movie. But
Halle Berry.
Oh yeah, dude. Oh my God.
We just talked about it.
She's great. Oh, so have you seen that?
I saw it, but like I saw it when I was young, so I didn't understand it well. I just remembered Halle Berry, so I do need to rewatch it. Yeah.
It's not a perfect movie, but it's like, I love it. It's really, really good. I also, lately I've like really like, I think I had a cold or something a couple months ago, and I watched all of, this is gonna sound so nerdy, but I watched all of the back to back, all of the Daniel Craig James Bond movies,
Interesting.
like back to back, which, you know, when they normally come out, they're years apart, and they're actually very intricately connected to one another. They watch better back to back, like in a binge watch. And I became obsessed. Like I really love like the James Bond. Like now the whole James Bond thing. Like I'm kind of obsessed with like the character and the movies. Really, really good stuff.
Do you want to try to get into making more movies? And is like writing a thing for you since you had a journalist background?
I don't know. I mean, making my documentary has been the biggest labor of love, you know, and I'm super proud of it. I can't wait to put it out and for people to see it. But it's been difficult. Like it's been really hard. If I can get to a place in my career where I can do those kinds of projects more easily, then yes, I would love that. I would love to do that because I love filmmaking. I love storytelling, and yeah, that would be incredible. But I would need like the support because doing this documentary has been like, it's been so hard. I did a Kickstarter campaign for it, which went really well, and then that was like 7 years ago.
You always need more money.
You always need more money,
right?
Yeah, and also like there's so many people involved, and then like how do you put it out there? So right now we're trying to figure out like what's going to be the best distribution for it. You know, but if I could like in the future do something that's like more turnkey, yeah, I would definitely.
And there's always the thing in the back of your head, I should just throw it up on YouTube or something. But then you want it to be
we don't want it
well received and seen and promoted and stuff, right?
Yeah. So we're hoping to like get into a film festival and sell it to a distributor. It's a really great film. So I think I don't think it's like a matter of like if, but when. But yeah, we just don't have anything like in place just yet.
Awesome.
Because we literally just finished it. So
there we go.
Yeah.
Want to take us on out of here, Andrew?
Sure thing. Thank you, everybody, for checking out today's episode. Make sure you stick around for Smelly's tip before we get out of here. Drop some comments down below. Let us know what you guys think about today's conversation. Maybe drop some more questions. Hopefully we can, reach out to Max and ask some more. Hit that like button and subscribe if you guys are not subscribed already. Follow the podcast at MB Power Project on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. My Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter is at I am Andrew Z. Nsima, where you at?
Discord's down below, so go check that out. At Nsima Inyang on Instagram and YouTube, and Nsima Inyang on TikTok and Twitter. Where can people find you, Max?
Oh man, Instagram at Max Lugavere, MaxLugavere. And then I host my own podcast called The Genius Life, which is on all your favorite podcast platforms. And then I wrote 3 books that are available at all of your favorite bookstores, Amazon included, Genius Foods, Genius Kitchen, and The Genius Life.
Yeah, we'll throw the links all in the description, including to the book. Yeah.
How old were you there?
That was like 2 years ago.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. I look pretty young, huh? or older.
Your hair looks browner in this
it looks
cover.
browner, yeah. The stress of making a documentary.
Yeah.
The stress. And the stress of having to battle vegans every time I post anything on social media.
And now carnivores, because you kind of gave them a little shot there.
Yeah.
Eat your veggies.
Eat your veggies. And your red meat.
Well, Smelly's tip for today is I've been messing around with just different positions with training and different positions of the spine. And I just want to encourage you guys to play around with this. Just try to tuck the hips underneath you a little bit, especially for something like running. Kind of stacking your hips and your shoulders kind of being in alignment it's just a good practice. But I've felt that by taking my hips and kind of tucking them underneath me slightly kind of gives a stretch to my back and kind of elongates the back. So maybe you'll find the same. So play around with that and give it a shot. I'm at Mark Smelly Bell. Strength is never a weakness. Weakness never a strength. Catch you guys later. Bye.